The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars. Your audio, your terms.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
Three, two, one. Happy New Year! Happy CoCo New Year, CoCo Cruisers. Happy New Year, Mike and Neil, or whatever your name is.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year to all the CoCo, was CoCo Nation, CoCo World, and all the CoCo nuts. Very exciting. We've recently observed the 26th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. That's our CoCo New Year. We had a little bit of an extended since we released a little early before CoCo Fest, and probably going to get back closer to our normal schedule. So that gives us put a little slack in the schedule for us, so that we could work out some of our CoCo Fest blues and get our eyes back on the prize. And so CoCo New Year, very exciting. Next CoCo Fest, 11 months away, and exciting to all of us now. Of course, we've got another event only about 5 months away. What's the name of that event, Neil?
Tandy Assembly.
Tandy Assembly, that's right. Very exciting. I heard they were mentioning Tandy Assembly coming up on the Retro Computing Roundtable. They kind of stumbled over the name of the town. They said they thought it was probably Cthulhu, Ohio.
That's a completely different place.
Sounds close.
Well, yeah, that place, you don't want to go there. But this is in Tandy Assembly, of course, will be in Chillicothe, Ohio. Very exciting. I know I actually stopped in Chillicothe briefly on the way back from CoCo Fest. I actually stopped there on the way to CoCo Fest for my overnight. And
I joined you.
Yeah, Neil was there as well. Briefly stopped there for a bio break on the way back. And it is I enjoy the little town of Chillicothe. I hope everyone else will. Hopefully all our CoCo cruisers will be joining us there.
Do have a Radio Shack.
What about Radio Shack?
I said, and they do have a Radio Shack. We just got to see if they can hold into our fest.
Yeah, well, they've got one, or they had one. We don't know how much longer. We'll see. I don't know what the prospects are for any of the Radio Shacks. Is there being some number of stores open? I don't know.
There's too much dust in the air. We got to wait till it settles.
Yeah. So how's everybody doing? Hadn't talked in a while. Doing anything
Great.
exciting, Mike?
I've been doing some scanning. I've stumbled into a bunch of some of it fairly rare documentation. I'm getting that scanned and going to post it out to the Color Computer Archive when I'm done.
Very good. Very exciting stuff. How about you, Neil? You've been keeping busy?
Yeah, I've been trying to fight the CoCo Fest blues. I've been collecting Tandy 1000 components, getting ready for Tandy Assembly. I want to do a nice display.
Oh, that should be exciting. Yeah, and I got a little care package from Neil. He sent me a couple of those Dragon joystick adapters. Pretty cool. And sent me a PCB I had requested for some potential hacking purposes. So we'll see what comes of that. I don't want to pre-announce anything there. But let's see what else. I haven't really been doing a whole lot else. I've been trying to catch up on work. I, of course, I'm still trying to catch up on my judging of the Retro Challenge event. Having that event in April was not a very good thing for me, with all the other things going on, plus some real life mixed in. So I'm still catching up there. I'm putting a few comments on people's project reports or whatever. I still haven't announced winners. Hopefully that'll be coming soon. I have been I've been thinking about a couple of potential projects, one of which involves the little PCB I got from Neil. Mostly just been dancing around, juggling new ideas for games and all that sort of stuff. Mostly brainstorming. Nothing really to speak of in terms of any code or anything like that. But we'll see. I had been thinking about starting another development blog or project blog for a game, but as you'll see later, it's a kind of a crowded field right now, so I don't know if that's a worthwhile endeavor or not. Anyway, what about acquisitions at eBay? You said you were getting some Tandy 1000 stuff. What all have you got?
Yeah, I have actually. I just acquired a Tandy CM11 RGB monitor. Got that shipped over to Mike's house, actually.
Cool.
What I want to demo is a later Tandy 1000 setup with VGA and have an earlier Tandy 1000 setup with the RGB, like the Tandy graphics, TGA.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that should be cool.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
Get a little perspective there. How about you, Mike? Anything cool?
No, I haven't really done a lot on eBay. I got a few more old modems in, a couple of modem ones with the original packaging and manuals, so that's kind of nice.
Ooh, that's very nice.
That's cool. Yeah, you guys trip me out with your little modem projects. I'm waiting for you guys to figure out how to dial into some secret Cold War facility that's still got an open modem line, and don't cause too much trouble if you do. So yeah, well, I mean, you know me, I'm always picking up a few things on eBay. Although I did get kind of a truly rare item, I think. I happened to type in Matra Alice, which, for those that aren't aware, if you are aware of the MC10 from Tandy, a French company called Matra, who knows how it's really pronounced, but however you pronounce Matra in French, they had a machine called the Alice that was basically a clone of the MC10, although the case was red. And then, unlike the MC10, it actually had a couple of follow-ons, one of which was the Alice 32, which is a similar machine, has a slightly different video display chip. It's more than slightly different, I think, but similar but different video display chip, a little more memory. Anyway, I found one listed on eBay, got it in from France, got the original box, just beautiful artwork on it. And it's just really, it's like the guy listed it and I searched for it, and probably all happened within 10 minutes of each other, I guess. But so I was pretty excited to get that one. Anyway, aside from that, yeah, a couple of this and that things on eBay. I did pick up a Tandy 1000 version of the Oregon Trail, which hopefully supports the Tandy graphics that Neil was talking about. And then now at CoCo Fest, I did pick up a pretty nice TRS-80 Model 4 that had sort of been tricked out by one of the Glenside folks, Rich Bear, and kind of in anticipation of I think more Z80 participation in CoCo Fest than what we actually got this year. But anyway, he put it in the auction and I took it home. And so I did find a TRS-80 Games Pack 3 Cosmic Fighter / Meteor Mission 2 on eBay.
Thanks.
So I picked that up, and so who knows? I'll have to tune in closer to the trash talk episodes, and maybe I'll become more of a trash talker too.
That was a clean Model 4 too.
Yeah, that was a nice one.
A box of documentation, and there's a fair amount of software in there. It's a pretty nice score. I appreciate Rich making that available, and I certainly appreciate me being the beneficiary of the auction there. Yeah, Neil, that item that I got that you were inquiring about and that I had misplaced, I had actually put it in my Model 4 software box. So that's where I finally found it. Anyway, well, that's probably enough to get us started. Good little intro. So why don't we take a short break, maybe hear a message from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with some announcements.
The CoCo. Unparalleled value and performance. Built by Motorola reliability and know-how. And now the power of the CoCo is fully unleashed. Nitro S9.
Whoa, cut.
Whoops, what happened?
People have been complaining about the way you're saying it. They want Nitrous 9, not Nitro S9.
Okay, must be some Canadian thing. Well, okay, I'll say it, Nitrous 9. All right, let's pick it up at about 9:21, right after,
Yeah, let's pick it up there in 4, 3, 2.
Nitrous 9. Bring the power of Unix to your CoCo. Expandable, modular, multitasking, and multi-user. Support up to 2 megabytes of RAM and up to 4 gigabyte disk partitions. Access multiple programs with full windowing. Organize your work with hierarchical directory structures. Develop with C, Basic 09, Pascal, Logo, and more. Nitrous 9. Unleash the power of the color computer.
Got it. Great job. Any way you say it, it's an awesome operating system.
All right, Coconuts, welcome back for some announcements. Probably should have said that this is episode 24 of the CoCo Crew Podcast. This, of course, is our inaugural, or the inauguration of our third year. It's the first episode of our third year. How the time does fly, huh? Pretty exciting. Anyway, we are the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on Twitter as @CoCo Crew Podcast. That's all one word, CoCoCrewPodcast. We are also available with a Facebook page, and that one, of course, is the CoCo Crew Podcast. That's 4 separate words, just because, we like consistency or inconsistency or something. The podcast, of course, is available through iTunes. We're available through Google Play. We are available for streaming through Stitcher and through TuneIn. The CoCo Crew Podcast is a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network is a collection of retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology-oriented, but some of which are more oriented in cultural or anti-cultural or whatever items from the 80s. If you're looking for another podcast and retro is your idea of fun, then you should check out the Throwback Network. We are, of course, also a member of the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. That, of course, is another collection of podcasts. These are all retro technology themed around retro video games, so mostly home computers from the 80s and home video game consoles from the 80s. Again, if you're looking for another podcast and that suits the theme, then you should check out the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio for the CoCo Crew is hosted by Cyber Ears. If you are an audiobook author, a church, or any other type of entity that needs a good means of hosting audio information or audio content over the internet, then you should check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. If you'd like to reach the CoCo Crew Podcast for feedback or inquiries or whatever else you'd like to say, we have some email addresses set up. We have the following email addresses will reach all three of the hosts of the CoCo Crew. That's show@cococrew.org, SHOW, podcast, PODCAST, @cococrew.org, feedback, FEEDBACK, @cococrew.org. So that's all three. And if for some reason you prefer to speak just to one of the other of the hosts, then you can reach me as John, JOHN, @cococrew.org. You can reach Neil as NEIL, @cococrew.org. And of course, there's Mike as Mike, MIKE, @cococrew.org. That is our standard announcements. At this point, we normally like to go over some upcoming events and shows of interest, things that happen in real life or meet space or however you like to think of it as. Get out, meet some other retro computing folks, hopefully in your area. Press the flesh and talk to other humans. Here's one I just stumbled across this week. The Columbus, Ohio Retro Gaming Society is having an event called CorgsCon. Corgs, I guess that's them. Columbus, Ohio Retro Gaming Society, CorgsCon 2017. That'll be Saturday, May 27th, which hopefully is not before this podcast is released. It might be, in which case you've already missed it, but maybe you can catch it next year. It is being held at the McCoy Center on Center Street in Hilliard, Ohio. Presumably this is somewhere in the area of Columbus, Ohio. Looks like
Korg sounds like a group that would open for Devo.
It does, kind of. Their pictures look like they've the past events. It look like they've got some kind of sales tables with lots of video game stuff. One of the pictures has what appears to be the members of the Intellivisionaries podcast. So, they have some famous people, so to speak, visiting them. Anyway,
like
if you're in that South Central Ohio area, on the weekend of May 27th, you may want us to check out CorgsCon. Very exciting. Similarly, if you're in the Indianapolis, Indiana area, Randy Kindig, who's the primary host, or basically the host of Floppy Days and one of the hosts of TRCD Trash Talk, and one of the co-hosts of the Antic podcast, he's trying to start up a vintage computing club of some sort in his general area around Indianapolis. And so he is trying to put together an event here, and I'm looking at the wrong place. And I guess he's looking for something on June 3rd of 2017. And I'm trying to find the details in the. We got a link out to the forum on Otari.
It's going to be at the Lebanon Public Library.
Cool. So if you're in or around Indianapolis, I think that will be a fun event, a cool event to go. And even if it's something that starts small, I suspect it will get bigger. So a very cool event if you can go and get in on the ground floor of. So fun. Very cool. The same day, if you are across the pond in the United Kingdom, June 3rd, 2017, then they're having something called the Cambridge Dragon Meetup. And so this event, they're having something in Cambridge. Again, I've got a link out to the, there we go. In a plan for a meetup of users of Dragons and other 6809 base machines at Cambridge's Center for Computing History. So that's pretty cool. So they have classroom space on Saturday the 3rd of June, and the backing and support of the museum. So if you're in the UK and have access to Cambridge, a lovely town, then I highly recommend that you make your way out there. I enjoy going to the UK, and I've actually been out to Cambridge as well and liked it there. And when I heard about this, I almost hopped a plane, but it's too short a notice. Airfares get quite expensive on short notice, and so I'm not going to be able to make this one. But sounds like a cool event. Sounds like Tormod, I think, said he was going to be there. Kieran Anscombe is going to be there.
Familiar names.
Other more famous names from the Dragon group or whatever, I think, are planning to be there. So again, if you're in the UK, if you're a Dragon person or a CoCo person, I think you should get out there. Sounds like a cool event to me.
Absolutely.
If you do go,
all
take
right,
lots of pictures for us.
Yeah, definitely share some pictures. I think that'll be cool. All right, coming up a week later, this is a multi-day event, June 9th through 11th, 2017. We're talking about the Southern Fried Game Room Expo. That'll be held at the Renaissance Atlanta Waverly Hotel and Convention Center. And I think we might know a couple of people that are going.
Hey.
Yeah, Mike's getting out there, and
he's going to meet me out there.
I believe you're dragging our friend Boise with you, right?
That's right.
So Boise and Mike are going to go down there, check out the games, and check out a favorite steak restaurant is what I hear. So
yeah.
That should be a cool event. The Southern Fried Game Room Expo looks like a cool event with lots of arcade games, pinball machines, and all kinds of cool stuff that makes noise and plays games and whatever. I've been wanting to go for years, and then always checking out. And then this time, Mike and boys are going to get to go. So at least they'll give me a report this time. Huh?
Take pictures.
Very exciting.
You could be the guinea pigs.
All right. Again, that same weekend, but June 10th through 11th, the Pacific Commodore Expo 2017. Obviously, that's a Commodore event. It's being held at the Living Computers Museum in Seattle, Washington. I don't have a lot of information about it and what's going to go on there, but if it's at the Living Computer Museum and it's a Commodore event, I guess you can put two and two together. Hopefully that'll be a fun event for our commie folks. And, if you are a commie folk in the Pacific Northwest, then I hope you'll get out there. There's a lot of commies in the Pacific Northwest, from what I hear. Yeah, here comes the hate mail.
Everywhere.
Well, having it at the Computer Museum is a good bet because you won't get bored.
Yeah, that should be fun. That's Paul Allen's museum, right? Sounds like that is a boon to our collective hobby. So supporting the museum should be a cool thing too. Very fun, very fun. All right. Once that passes, you get a couple of weeks of break. If you're trying to go to all these events, you're a pretty busy guy. So coming up July 18th through 23rd of 2017, we're talking about Kansas Fest 2017. This event is held at the Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. This is the summer camp for retro geeks. You go and you stay in the dorms. You take meals in the university mess hall, or no, they don't call it a mess hall. They call it a cafeteria, right? And you sleep in the dorms, and you do weird computer stuff basically 24 hours a day. Stuff that your friends and family probably don't understand. But if you are listening to this podcast, you probably do understand and probably would enjoy it. I've been once. I like to think that I will eventually go again, but I will not be there this year. Either of you guys going to this time?
It was on my calendar, but I'm not going to make it this year either.
Not going to make it. Oh, well, can't make it to everything.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it either.
So it is a cool event. If anybody's on the fence about it, I don't know how they're doing on registrations. They did have a limit this year. I have no idea if they've got close to it or not. If you're interested, of course, it's an Apple II event, but aside from that, if you're interested, I highly recommend it. So, okay. Coming up next, July 29th and 30th, 2017, the Commodore Vegas Expo version 13.0. Again, another commie event. I don't know if Las Vegas is any better or worse than Portland for commies. But they're more of a mob mentality down there, I think. Oh, well. Anyway, we've covered this event for a while. Pictures look cool. Looks like our kind of people sitting around playing with old computers and doing silly things. And it's in Vegas, baby, so how bad could it be? So if that Commodore and Las Vegas combination sounds appealing to you, then I recommend you find a way to get there. July 29th, 30th, 2017. Okay, one of my favorite ones we've been kind of joking about, the CoCo Expo. This is August 5th and 6th of 2017. This is somewhere up in New Jersey. Anyway, it's in New Jersey. This is the one with Sophie Reynolds and Tyler Bushnell. Sounds like they've added a couple of new guests. The Party Nerds Podcast. Don't know who they are. Somebody named Patrick Hickey Jr. No idea who he is. And another attractive young lady, appears to be a cosplayer of some form called Caramello, but it's 3 instead of an E. So, this is probably a wild event, would be my guess. Caramello cosplay, Mark Toman, guest speaker, River West CEO. I don't know what that is. Party Nerds live podcast crew. Anyway, this event appears to be for Patrick Hickey Jr., award-winning editor and writer. Someone holding a video game controller, so whatever. And then Sophie Reynolds, Disney Channel's Ashley Parker on Gamer's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're into all things CoCo, if you're in the New Jersey area or some combination thereof, August 5th and 6th, 2017, then I recommend you go check this out. It looks like it'll be a fun event. I'm not sure it's quite my crowd, but I imagine you'll have fun. Don't you guys think?
Well, you know what I was thinking?
What's that?
I was just thinking what we could do is one of us can go crash it. Since there's cosplay, we can dress up as Coco Cat.
We're going to get Neil a Coco Cat costume.
Incognito.
Yeah. All right. Something more up along our normal bounds of events. August 5th and 6th. So the same weekend as CoCo Expo, but on the other side of the country, VCF XII or 12. I know that because Channel 12 when I was growing up was WXII.
That's anyway, Roman numerals.
That's right. Not only that, but then later, one of the other stations, we got some, after we, you grow up, you had the 3 traditional stations, ABC, CBS, NBC, and then when we got a couple more stations, one of them was Channel 45, and that was WXLV. Pretty cool. Anyway, ancient North Carolina history. Vintage Computer Festival West, August 5th to 6th, 2017. This is being held at the Computer History Museum on Shoreline Boulevard in Mountain View, California. I've been there. It's a cool place. Go and check out some artifacts of computing's past. Last time I was there was no CoCo, but there was a dragon, so kind of, made me feel a little less angry towards them. But anyway, looks like a pretty standard vintage computing festival style of events. Lots of old computers, that sort of thing. Should be a cool event if you can make it and you're on the West Coast of the United States, particularly if you're in the Silicon Valley area, then get there August 5th and 6th, 2017.
And Tim Linder, he's got us covered for the CoCo stuff now.
Okay, well, let's hope so. Let's see if we can get one into the museum itself. I think that would be good.
Would be.
All right. Moving on, September 9th to 10th, 2017. Talking about VCF Midwest 12. This, of course, is a cool event held in the Chicago area, so specifically in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. This is not too far from the O'Hare Airport in Chicago, as I recall. Again, another VCF style of event, lots of old computers, pretty a strong Commodore influence in the crowd there, if I'm not mistaken. But the organizers there are some good guys. They have good relations with the Glenside folks and have been participating some in CoCo Fest over the past few years. In fact, their de facto leader, or maybe just plain old leader, Jason Timmons, was our backup auctioneer this year at CoCo Fest. So they have the time left until VCF Midwest 12 up on their website, 111 days, 12 hours, 55 minutes. So this event is unique, I think, in that they do not charge admission. They only accept donations. They have a donation meter on their page. And you can fund them either through PayPal. It's a good event. I went last year, joined my co-host there. You guys enjoyed that, didn't you?
Yeah, fun show.
Yeah, excellent time.
Yep, good event. All right. Well, now, as we all know, traditionally the focus of, as far as promoting any specific event of this podcast, has always been CoCo Fest. I don't think that we're going to stop promoting CoCo Fest, but at least for the next few months, I think we're going to focus a bit more strongly on promoting this next event. This, of course, is Tandy Assembly, coming up October 7th and 8th of 2017, Chillicothe, Ohio. The link in the show notes to the Tandy Assembly website. Pete Satinsky of the Trash Talk folks has been doing a lot of work on our website, making some improvements lately. It is looking pretty good. Again, this is a Tandy-oriented event. It is open to basically any kind of Tandy computer or fan thereof. I recently wrote our first blog post related on the official Tandy Assembly blog. So you go through the links there. I think you can find it. I definitely want everyone to come out if you're a CoCo cruiser or even just a casual listener trying to find more information about Tandy computers in general. This event is for you. We want you to come and hang out with us, come spend the weekend and display, show us your Tandy projects, talk about your Tandy experiences, any and all of the above. Do you guys have anything to add?
Just that it's going to be a good time, and we definitely want to see everybody come out. Chillicothe is just a cool little college town, easy to get around, lots of places to eat. So it's going to be a nice, relaxing, fun setting. Yeah,
very cool. I have, like I said, I've enjoyed all the time I've spent in Chillicothe so far. Not a great deal of time, but certainly a comfortable hotel. And once you put some Tandy computer stuff in there, it's practically heaven, right?
Absolutely.
You can't go wrong.
Okay, well, so come and see us, Tandy Assembly. All right, rounding out the year, December 3rd and 4th of 2017, this will be World of Commodore. And this is going to be in Toronto, or Toronto, as the locals say it, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So, Neil, you're a special ambassador to this event. I know you've been a few times. Do you have any cool things to say about it?
You know, if you're into Commodore, it's definitely a good event to check out. I mean, I go every year, just because it's so close to me. I can't not go. It's pretty much the only retro event we have in my area. So
we should go crash it. I mean, Canada in the wintertime is lovely.
Yeah. Well, you're still safe at the beginning of December. So if you're in the area, we'll meet up down there.
That's cool.
Mike was close last year. You were up in November.
Yeah, I was just a couple weeks too early.
Well, it must have been toasty warm in November in Toronto. All right. Well, that ends our announcements for episode 24. So we're going to take another short break, and we'll be back with a fairly lengthy news segment. So, CoCo Cruisers, stay tuned.
Something new is coming.
Tandy Assembly. Tandy Assembly is about Radio Shack and Tandy computers.
Tandy Assembly is about interacting.
Tandy Assembly is about people.
Tandy Assembly is about fun.
The first gathering of its kind.
Computers of the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
All Radio Shack and Tandy makes and models.
Join us. Don't miss Tandy Assembly.
In Chillicothe, Ohio.
October 7th and 8th.
Whether you're near or far.
Tandy Assembly is for everyone.
Visit our webpage at www.tandyassembly.com.
Tandy Assembly.
All right. And now we're back with some news. I will start with a little sad news. Not heartbreaking, but those of you who have some familiarity with Radio Shack, perhaps you've worked there in the past, or perhaps you were an avid follower of Radio Shack's corporate intrigue in the 80s. I don't know. But here's the name when I recall from when I worked at Radio Shack in the early 90s. And I think I'd heard it even before from occasional mentions in Rainbow or something like that. But Bernie Appel, who had been CEO at Radio Shack, kind of a legend in retail sales, I guess, and known in the Fort Worth area, if nothing else. Apparently, he's died at the age of 85. Not a lot to say here. I think he had, definitely along with John Roach and some other names from the past, had some influence on the that era of computing at Radio Shack that helped form all of us. But, anyway, let's pay our respects. Bernie Appel, age 85, rest in peace. Okay, slightly happier anniversary or whatever. We recently witnessed the birthday of BASIC, and BASIC first appeared on May 1st of 1964. That's 53 years ago. Not exactly a round number for the anniversary, but there you are. A long-lived programming language. It probably has some influence on the lives of anyone listening to this podcast. I think many of us still occasionally will dabble in BASIC, even if it's not necessarily our go-to language. And like I said, it certainly had some influence on our early computing history.
That's the year I was born.
Very exciting stuff, huh?
Maybe there's a connection there.
Oh, wow, you're old.
Yeah, that's the other connection I was going to make. It's when the Beatles came, too.
Oh,
so,
well. Oh, well, there you go.
That was a good year.
Awesome. Well, not a bad year. All right. Okay, well, so the next few links here all kind of link back to Steve Strobridge. We've mentioned him many times on the podcast, and he is a YouTuber and has made a number of contributions over the past couple of years to the community in general. Has started with game reviews on his YouTube channel. Came to CoCo Fest last year and did video streaming for CoCo Fest last year. Also did that this year. Just an all-around nice guy. And so we're going to cover a little bit of what he's been up to. One thing that he started doing is he's started hosting what he calls CoCo Talk. And it's basically a live audience show where it's a weekly event now where they're getting together and talking about, various color computer topics. I think they said they're going to dedicate some of those shows to at least part of them to talking about what happens on this podcast. But we haven't had a new one of these since they started. So, we'll see how they handle that. Anyway, I've listened to a few of them, and some of them are. Well, I've basically listened to all of them, and participated in a few of them, and. If you need a fix, if you're hot to talk CoCo on a Saturday afternoon, it's a pretty good place to go.
Seems like they're doing beginner topics as well, so that's good for anybody who's wanting to dig a little deeper beyond playing games.
Yeah, that's right. And they're covering a lot of stuff at different levels, and a lot of people who are participating regularly are people with some pretty strong expertise. Particularly like Curtis Boyle and Bill Noble, who have, experts on Nitrous 9, of course, or Nitro S9, or however it's pronounced. We have Nick Morentis and John Strong and other folks that with some game programming knowledge there. Rick Adams, of course. Have been participating, and then just some other community experts, people that have knowledge they like to share, like the Scarlet fellow, Barry Nelson.
Barry Nelson, yes.
Anyway, so if you're looking for an extra source of CoCo-related entertainment, you may want to go check that out. Also from Steve Strobridge, like I said, he came to this year's CoCo Fest, and he started a photo repository or whatever on Facebook, gallery, I guess you call it, a photo gallery, and has been collecting CoCo Fest pictures, and I'm sure each of us is accounted for in there, plus a whole lot of other people that were at CoCo Fest, and he's got pictures of the seminars, pictures of the parking lot, pictures of John Strong's joysticks, and pictures of people's projects, and pictures of the trophies that were given out, and pictures of the heron, pictures of people touching the heron. So, anyway, if you didn't make it to CoCo Fest, then I said, well, why didn't you make it to CoCo Fest? But whatever your reasoning, if you didn't make it to CoCo Fest and you want to see what the pictures are, or see what some of it look like, you should go check out Steve's photo gallery on Facebook. So there you go, links in the show notes. Actually, I went out of order a little bit there, but whatever. Backing up, Stevie's been collecting, creating what he calls a master list of CoCo-related websites. So he has a page with a bunch of links on it. This is kind of, to be honest, it's sort of reminiscent of the early days of the internet, say around the mid-'90s, before Google had become prevalent. So instead of just plain old just searching, you go to this one site and kind of read through it and see what you can find. In fact, that's the earliest CoCo webpage I remember. There was a page kind of similar to this, was in like 94, 95-ish. There was a page someone maintained that just had link after link after link. You guys know what I'm talking about? Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, and there have been different iterations of that. And I think that's how I found out that CoCo Fest was still going on when I got back into the hobby.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what happened to that. I'm not even sure who maintained that link or why it disappeared, but probably just moved on. Anyway, I'm not trying to belittle this page by saying it's something from the mid-'90s. It's just that it sort of reminds me of that. So he's got all these links in here, links to different people's blogs, to different YouTube channels, got links to the different emulators, that sort of stuff. So if you are looking for sort of a one-stop place to go and look for where to get started finding internet resources on the color computer, you may want to go check out the master list of CoCo-related websites from Steve Strobridge.
That could be a compliment if you say it's a page from the 90s.
I was thinking the same thing.
You like that.
You guys remember the web ring?
Let's see.
Yeah, the web ring.
All right, one more from Steve Strobridge. Circles demo a programming challenge. Of course, this is a YouTube video because we're talking about Steve Strobridge. But so Steve's got a collection of videos he's done on basic programming where he's working through the the manuals, the basic manuals that came with the color computer. And when he's working through the extended color basic manual, he at some point he did a bunch of stuff on circles. And I guess unsatisfied with just going through the book, he did some kind of circles demo. Basically he's challenged other people to recreate his demo of circles. And so he's got a video on that. You may want to check it out. And so there's the link in the show notes to Steve's Circles demo, a programming challenge.
It's definitely good if you're a visual learner.
Oh, yeah? Very cool. All right. So moving away from Steve onto our perennial hero, Jim Gary.
Right.
Jim had an entry in the retro challenge, and then he withdrew after it was already kind of complete. So I'm not really sure what that was all about. I think he said that he had gotten started on the retro challenge entry early or something. He didn't feel like he'd follow the rules. So I don't know. I had enough other stuff to judge. I didn't argue with him. But Jim, you're certainly welcome to come back to retro challenge anytime we have another event. But moving on, we have some, we have 4 videos from Jim Gary. We've got an update on his Rally X clone that he's doing. He's got, it looks like Stimmy Graphics mode where he's doing a clone of Rally X. He's got something called Jerusalem Adventure, which is, I guess, an adventure game, an adventure style of game. Let's see. Got one called Cross Rally with machine code. I think maybe this is an extension to his Rally X game. He's actually, I saw him recruiting some MC10 machine language programmers to help him speed up parts of the code. So he's incorporated that. And then he's got one called the Gray simulation from ZX81 in some source code, I guess, for the ZX81. And he's got basically he's trying to kill a submarine. So very cool. Again, it's always cool to see Jim Gary. It's just good to know he's out there and being active with the stuff all the time. It just makes me feel good. I don't know about you guys.
That's great. It's fantastic.
That's great. Yeah. It's fantastic. So very cool stuff, and definitely one of my 8-bit heroes, shall we say.
Basic
anyway,
heroes.
So on that note, I think he's definitely a basic hero, and certainly a Tandy hero. So, all right. Well, on that note, in consideration of the length of our news segment, I think we're going to take a short break and hear again from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with some more news.
Whoa! What do you want, mister?
I'm looking for gold.
Shoot, mister, we ain't got no gold around these here parts, but you can look all you want.
We got plenty of lead and tin, though.
Who are you? What you got there, stranger?
It's the new J&M Systems JFD CoCo Disk Controller. It sets a new standard in performance and quality. Its built-in digital phase lock loop data separator means no need for adjustments, ever. And the card contacts, pure gold. Woo-hoo! Best of all, the JFD CoCo is plug compatible with the original CoCo and the new CoCo 2.
How much, stranger?
Just $139.
Wait, where can I get one?
From J&M Systems, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
All right, back to continue the news. Our next link is for a movie, and the movie's called The New 8-Bit Heroes, coming, of course, from the New 8-Bit Heroes LLC. These guys are serious. And so basically the gist of it is we've got a documentary about a couple of, I guess old geeks that used to play NES games, and But they kind of years ago sort of designed a game in their head, and then they grew up, and then one night Peter Pan flew through their window and dragged them off to Neverland, or something like that.
What a story.
At some point, they decided to take in modern times here, take the opportunity to go off and create the NES game that they had envisioned in their youth. And they're doing that, and they've got a documentary film about it. And then along with the film, they've produced some tools that to help them produce their NES game, and I guess they're releasing the tools. So you can benefit from that if you want to do an NES game. And of course, if you want to buy their game, or if you want to buy the movie, they've got some of that stuff available too. The name of the game's called Mystic Searches, and still in production here. You can get versions of the case. That's funny. You get the standard gray NES cartridge case. You can get a black one if that's what you want, or you can get one made out of wood.
I'll take that.
Do they have any kind of a bundle so you can get a discount?
So you can get all three of them. So get this: the gray case one is $40. That's probably about what you'd expect. The black case, $64. Well, okay, a little bit of a premium. The wooden one, $128. And then if you want one of each, this is the same game. You'd be getting 3 copies of the same game, just in different cases. One of each of those, you get it for $192. None of those options include the movie. The movie on Blu-ray is $14.99. Hey, whatever. I actually ordered the gray case version of the game and the movie because I'm that kind of a sucker. And because I think of myself as an 8-bit hero, because, I write games too. So
yeah, I definitely want to get that movie. Anyway, it sounds pretty good. And I would only take the wood cartridge if it comes in the Radio Shack walnut veneer.
That would be cool. That definitely would be cool. Well, anyway, so if you're listening to this podcast, that's the kind of thing that probably appeals to you. Maybe not, but particularly if you're not allergic to NES, if that's not just a little too new for you, then you probably want to check that out. So again, that's called the new 8-bit Heroes. Now, moving on, the next one is now this is an Apple II game, but bear with me. So this is this guy, Michael Packard. He started a Facebook group not too long ago. And the Facebook group is, what is it called? Apple Graphics and Arcade Game Design Enthusiasts is the name of the group. But the enthusiast part, there's a book called Apple Graphics and Arcade Game Design. It's by an author named Jeffrey Stanton. Jeffrey Stanton also wrote a similar book called Atari Graphics and Arcade Game Design, which, of course, is a similar theme. The Atari one, I think, is actually a little bit of a better book. It's a little bit more detail on accessing hardware on the Atari 8-bits. But either one, either or both of them. Actually, I have the Apple one, an original copy of the Apple Graphics and Arcade Game Design. Never been able to find the Atari one, although I did find a PDF and did some Samastat publishing for my own copy of that. Anyway, they're both good reads if you want to learn some of the techniques used for writing video games on 8-bit machines. Obviously, it's not exactly the same bit for bit because it's an Apple II in this case, or an Atari 8-bit on the other version of the book. But it's some of the same kinds of techniques and putting graphics, bitmaps into memory and how to move them in around screens and that sort of stuff. So anyway, it got my attention because of that. And then what he's done, he's been working through the book and started creating his own game that he calls Alien Downpour, which looks like sort of a weird mix of Galaxian and Space Invaders or whatever. It's for the Apple II, and he's selling Apple II games. He's selling his Apple II game available on diskette or on cassette. You can order it now. I don't think it's shipped yet. Well, it does say May 16th, 2017 release day, so maybe it just shipped. Again, cool. It's an Apple II game, not a Tandy thing, but it's the kind of thing we like to see and support, and maybe it's an example of what someone else might want to do. I also like, if nothing else, it puts sort of a price point in there for if you want to do something similar. You can see what people are charging for it on the Apple II and judge accordingly. So anyway, if you want to write your computer game, hopefully for a Tandy, hopefully for a color computer, but whatever you want to write it for, and you're an old man and you want to write it on an 8-bit machine, well, don't feel too silly. There's at least other fools out there that are doing the same thing.
I think I'm actually going to buy that game. It looks really cool. I like the graphics he used in it.
Yeah, I've been watching it for a while. So pretty cool stuff. So anyway, Michael Packard, Apple II 8-bit hero, I guess, huh? All right. Well, so here's one from Kieran Anscombe, really more of a Dragon fellow. He's about the guy behind the X-Roar. But he says he's developing this new game for the Dragon and maybe for the CoCo as well. And let's see. So he's got a development blog here. He's calling it Dungeons and Dragons, and it's Dungeons, DUNJUNZ, Dungeons and Dragons. And so, like I said, it's a development blog. You kind of read back through some of the stuff he's talking about. Talks about the origin of the project. How I think it's a BBC micro game that he's trying to recreate. And so he shows some of the screens and how he's doing the conversions. Got some videos of stuff running. So yeah, it looks pretty cool. It's kind of exciting. It's always nice to see kind of development in progress. And so, to the notes, I think you should check it out. You guys had a chance to look at this yet?
I haven't had a chance to check that one out.
Not this one. We must have added this one recently.
All right, the next one on the list here, Forest of Doom. This, of course, is from D. Bruce Moore, a man who has an excellent singing voice. For those of you who are at the CoCo Fest, you were able to hear the lovely rendition of the Canadian national anthem from Mr. Moore here.
He put me to shame.
I didn't even know the words. I didn't even know there were words. Oh, Lord. Anyway, so he's got an adventure game here called Forest of Doom. Only the bravest souls enter, only the most cunning return. Defeat innumerable monsters to ransom the king's scepter, stolen by the evil wizard and kept deep in the Forest of Doom. Your sword, shield, and wits are your only allies. Pray you find a magical inn as your only rest. So very cool. It's got a story here about how he started writing this adventure game a long time ago, and then they kind of put it away and did some other stuff. Actually got paid for writing some other CoCo software back in the day for T&D software. And then kind of eventually forgot all about the CoCo, or not quite, but anyway, not too long ago, his brother bought him a CoCo 2, and kind of got back into it and started pulling out his old cassettes, and before you know it, he was working on Forest of Doom. He had some of this on display at CoCo Fest. It looks pretty cool. Definitely interested in seeing the outcome of this. Looks like it'll be a cool game. What do you guys think?
Yeah, very cool. It was cool to see what he had set up there at CoCo Fest.
His display was awesome.
All right. So, another 8-bit hero, D. Bruce Moore.
Is that like the theme of the show, 8-bit heroes?
That's the theme of this section. All right, so the next one, another 8-bit hero, Nick Morentis. He's fresh from his recent release of Popstar Pilot and his extended blogging experience there. Nick is back starting a new blog for a game he's calling Gunstar. Let's see. We greeted them as visitors, but they descended as invaders, abducting our people and transporting them back to their planet as food. They had come to farm the human race. But hidden deep within the rubble, a small team of survivors have been gathering the parts to secretly build mankind's only hope for survival. A small one-man fighter craft combining human and alien technology with the power to strike back. It's up to you, Commander. Pilot the Gunstar back to the aliens' homeworld and stop this alien onslaught. The battle for Earth has just begun. Kind of floated at the end. But anyway, so another game development blog from Nick Morentis. He's got a couple of chapters so far. The most recent one is talking about the details or some of the details of his graphics engine. If you're into reading this kind of stuff, it's pretty good stuff. Check it out. The development blogs seem to be all the rage now. What do you guys think?
Well, I'd just like to mention that I'm glad to see that Nick has a new game project on the go. I was kind of worried after Popstar Pilot he might have just burnt out from that. So this is good.
It's definitely good, and I think the blogs are interesting.
Yep, very exciting. Okay, well then, so here's one just sort of popped up over the past couple of days. Well, if you look at the dates on the postings, it looks like maybe it's been kind of submerged here for a little while Hugo's worked on it, but now he's surfaced. Rebooting the project. He's got this, I'm not sure what the name of his game is, something like Kim and the Bees or something like that, or I'm not even sure if it actually is in here. Anyway, he's got some pretty good looking graphics on a game he's working on. Got a number of entries. Again, it's a development blog. He talks about, let's see. Oh, there you go. Current title is Kaboomerang Kim. So Kim's got a kaboomerang that I guess she uses as a weapon. Pretty funny.
You look good.
Say that 5 times real fast.
Kaboomerang Kim.
Yeah, the graphics do look nice. They actually kind of look like Amiga graphics. I don't know if I can say that here, but they definitely look nice.
Yeah, they definitely look good. So we'll see. He's been working on it a little while. Hugo has. But looks like he's found some time to dedicate to it. So very exciting stuff, huh? So again, another 8-bit hero. In fact, that's 2 Canadians and an Aussie on the CoCo 8-bit heroes here, and a UK. Where's our American 8-bit heroes, huh? Kieran's in the UK. Bruce and Hugo are Canadians. Nick's an Aussie.
I know one 8-bit hero that made Farfall.
Well, but what have you done for me lately, right? That's what I always hear. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, let's see. Let's move on a little bit. Let's see. Our next link, kind of out of nowhere, but it's from the Vintage is the New Old website. Something called VicScript. It says a programming language interpreter. And it really is just that. It's somebody's toy language. Tend to be a fun, simple language for twiddling with hardware. Only native types are 16-bit integers and arrays of 16-bit integers. Full range of C-style operations for logical and bitwise manipulation of values is provided. Blah, 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 blah. So it looks like it's a new language. Now, this is for the VIC 20. So why am I covering it here? Well, my answer here, I usually am one of the prime movers on putting these news segments together. And sometimes the news segments don't just cover CoCo stuff. And so if you're ever wondering why, I think, I've tried to answer this before, but when there's stuff like this, that it's not about the CoCo, but my point is, damn it could be. There's no reason you can't, if you've got this inside you, if you want to write a computer language or whatever, 8-bit machines are great for doing goofy little projects. And, this person's written their VIC script for their VIC-20, but there's no reason you couldn't write CoCo script or whatever language name that you want to give it. Boise did something similar not too long ago with a language called Brain something. It's just sometimes fun to play around with projects, exercise your computer science skills, and see what you can come up with. And so this is just an example. Somebody's done this with a VIC-20. If you can do this on a VIC-20, you can do it on a CoCo. Just especially something like this where there's no graphics, no sound, whatever. I guarantee you the 6809 and even the shortcomings of the CoCo's graphics hardware, 6809 can pull this off and without breaking a sweat. So there's a challenge out there. If you always have wanted to write some sort of command interpreter or language interpreter, why don't you pull it out now and do it for the CoCo?
Yeah, I'd like the corn shell, please.
Well, that's if you go over to Phusix, you're probably not too far away from getting something like that. You probably
Very true.
You probably could get some corn on Phusix. Anyway, now so this next one, have we covered this before on the show? This is the 32-bit processing for the Vectrex arcade system. I have one of these. I can't remember if we talked about it on the show or not. May have just mentioned it, but we can mention it again. Let's see. So this is talking about the Vectrex. So here's the intro if you're not familiar. Alongside the Commodores, Ataris, Nintendos, and all the other game systems of the 80s, there's a single unique video game system that stood out from the pack. This was the Vectrex, a console with a built-in CRT meant to display vector graphics and only vector graphics. And that's all it would do is vector graphics. So this is a little machine. It kind of looks like an original style toaster Mac or whatever, but it's in a black plastic case. And it has a vector graphics display. And so that's like the old Asteroids machines or Lunar Lander or, Star Wars even, except it's black and white. So, cool. Okay. What's it got to do with the CoCo? Well, the Vectrex actually has something that is sort of related to the CoCo because it has a 6809 processor, but that's not what this is about. This card it's called the Vectrex 32. This plugs into the Vectrex and then kind of takes control over it and kind of relegates the Vectrex, the Vectrex itself to just being a display for a PIC32 microcontroller that's embedded on the cartridge. And then that PIC32 runs a version of BASIC, and you can write code in BASIC that runs obviously at a much faster speed on this PIC32 and then can display it on your vector monitor. So again, what does this have to do with the CoCo? Well, we see all the time all the attention that is given to projects like the CoCo 3 VGA or Roger Taylor's sort of equivalent project. So there's some demand for these super extended, powerful versions of a CoCo that might exist in somebody's head. Well, one pretty cool way to do that, in my opinion, would be a plug-in cartridge that would have, either this PIC32 style of processor or maybe an ARM processor or something like that. You could plug it in, or even like a parallax propeller or something. You could plug it into the cartridge port. You can pull the halt line on the CPU and take over the machine. So, I mean, for our budding hardware designers out there, something like this is a good model, I think, where you could have the processor take over the machine. It could be powerful enough to run a scripting language, whether it's BASIC or Python or something like that, but then still manipulate the graphics on the CoCo or the sound on the CoCo. It's kind of a cross challenge where you eliminate some of the shortcomings of vintage hardware, but still deal with some of the limitations that make it interesting.
Yeah, it's
So
a good way
anyway,
to do it without modifying your hardware either.
That's right. In this case, you just plug it in, and it plugs right in the cartridge port. No modifications necessary. Anyway, that's why it's here, to show you what kind of projects are possible on other machines that are similar to the CoCo. There's no reason why you couldn't do this kind of project on the CoCo. Do it. I'd like to see it. I'd be more interested in that than I am in some of the other projects that are already out there. Okay, so this is a weird one. FPGA emulates NES cart prototype, so cyberpunk. So it's mostly just showing you what people do, what kind of Franken hardware designs people can dream up. So this is basically just a flash cart for, looks like it's originally for the Famicom. So imagine the CoCo Flash that Jim Brain and Barry Nelson talk about. That's basically what this card does. It's just it does it for the Famicom, which was the Japanese version of the Nintendo Entertainment System. But look at the hardware hacking project. If you go to the link to in the show notes and look at the pictures here on Hackaday of some of the prototype hardware they did along the way to this, it's just wow. It's like pin through hole kind of technology, techno porn. It's just amazing how much effort has gone into some of this stuff and whatever. I don't know. This is not one where I recommend doing a project like this for the CoCo. This is just, wow, look at this project that some weirdo did. So, all right. Well, pretty cool. Enough of that. Moving on. Now here's Fusix. The Z80 Fusix is like old-fashioned Unix. So this, of course, is about Z80 Fusix. Let's see, running what on a CPM machine and put back ported. Oh, yes, this is the RC 2014 computer. It's actually a modern retro computer, shall we say? It's a modern design dating from 2014 for a Z80 based slot oriented computer. But so it's it's a Z80. It's not a 6809, but it could be. And we know that Fusix can run on the 6809 because it runs on the CoCo. So here's a way you could take a project. You could do something like this. I know one of the Retro Challenge projects has somebody who's built a computer around the 6309 from scratch, which of course we all are familiar with the 6309 because of its use to supercharge our CoCos so they can run Nitrous 9. Imagine doing something like this, but with a 6809 or 6309 processor instead of Z80, and booting up Fusix on it. Hey, knock yourself out. I think it'd be a cool project. Anyway, just keeping up with some of the retro computing technology on Hackaday. Now here's one that's kind of interesting from a, hey, we might could use that sort of perspective. And this is not a project you would do with a CoCo. This is a project you might use to benefit a CoCo. So basically, what they've done is taken a Raspberry Pi device, which are, you hear about all the time these days, and they've actually run code on a Raspberry Pi to make it look like a SCSI device. And so if you have a SCSI driver, like the Cloud9, was it TC9? Was that what he called his?
Yeah, the TC9.
If you have the Cloud9 TC9 SCSI adapter, you might could plug it to a Raspberry Pi. Even if you can't find a working SCSI drive, but you might plug it into a Raspberry Pi and then still be able to use it for storage. So pretty cool. Not unlike the SCSI to SD project that's out there that people are making these days. You can find on eBay. Anyway, this is more just be aware this is out there. If you need a SCSI device and can't find it, you might be able to turn your Raspberry Pi into one. All right, very cool. Well, let's see. Okay, one more from Hackaday, I think. Yeah, this is from Hackaday. All right, so a mini ITX Atari 800. Again, not a CoCo project, but if you read into it, someone has built a replacement Atari 800 computer, so a new motherboard for the Atari 800. It uses, vintage chips, but the motherboard itself fits an ITX form factor. If you're not familiar with ITX or mini ITX, it's It's kind of like the old baby AT style motherboards back in when you build your own PCs back in the mid 90s or whatever. As long as you had baby AT motherboards, you could find cases falling off the backs of trucks and whatever else. So in this case, the Mini ITX is a form factor standard for the motherboard, and this person's built an Atari 8-bit motherboard that fits that form factor, and so he's got it plugged into an off-the-shelf case. And so if you're an Atari 8-bit enthusiast and you want an up-to-date motherboard and you want to find a case for it, well, here you go. Now, why have I included this? Well, that's one of the complaints we've heard again and again about the CoCo 3 FPGA in particular is, well, you get it, but it still doesn't feel very much like a computer. And, what kind of reproduction machine could we ever build? Well, it's still not going to feel very much like a CoCo because it won't be in a computer case. It won't fit the CoCo case, whatever. Well, the Mini ITX won't fit a CoCo case either, but it will fit a case that looks like a computer. So here's an idea. If you're interested in building a reproduction CoCo, why don't you figure out a way to build it in a Mini ITX form factor, and then your case problem is pretty much solved. What do you guys think of that?
I like this idea, and those cases are very plentiful. They're very easy to find, and I also like how they used old school chips on that motherboard. I was just checking that out now while you were mentioning it. That's pretty cool.
Yep. Now, you're not going to be able to do a CoCo 3 this way because you're probably not going to be able to find enough gimme chips to make it useful. You might could do a CoCo 2 this way. Now, what would the interest level be in that? I'm not sure. You might could do something that's basically a CoCo 2 with a different video chip that's more plentiful. Then is that a CoCo? Well, that's another argument we can have on the podcast or on CoCo Talk or something else some other day. But anyway, you come up with a project, we'll argue about it later. How's that? All right. Well, I thought that was interesting, so there, I shared it with you. Let's see. Well, let's do 3 more, and then we'll take another break. Here's one a couple of people sent to me, and I don't know if they sent them to me just because they thought it'd be interesting or because they didn't fully understand what was being done here, but they knew about my interest in adding sound chips to the CoCo cartridges. So here's one from Ken Sheriff's blog. This as a retro guide and does a lot of really deep technical stuff for retro computing. And in this case, he's actually decapping a sound chip. This the 76477 Space Invaders sound chip. And I think maybe they thought this was the same chip that I've been advocating putting on CoCo cartridges, but it's not. This is a different chip, and it's the biggest difference here is this one's not it's not programmable. You don't write to the registers. Basically, what you have to do is hook the pins up to external components and control it with voltages and that sort of thing. And so you can do some cool stuff with the sound effects, but what you end up building is it just becomes the center part of a bigger circuit that you have to do your own control on or whatever. It's not as flexible as it looks, I guess is the point of saying. So your chances of being able to make good use of this in a CoCo cartridge pretty slim. But if you were building an arcade machine and you wanted to build a special dedicated soundboard that had 5 different effects, you could put this chip on there and probably build all 5 of the effects around this chip. Anyway, is it an interesting article? Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Kind of talks about both the whole how do you decap a chip and how do you make sense of what you see, but just also kind of how the chip worked and that sort of stuff. So it is pretty deep technical, a lot of electrical engineering stuff in here. If that doesn't fit your background or interest, you probably don't want to bother with this one. But if it is interesting to you, then there's a lot to read. Okay, moving on. This one is Instructable. This is the DIY flexible printed circuits. And so he's got a method here of using a what he calls a solid ink printer. I think this is what some people I've heard call a thermal wax transfer style of printer. So it's not your average inkjet printer, but they are out there in the world and not impossible to get. And a certain kind of paper, and you can build flexible circuits with it. And you have to do the same kind of etching you do with a regular PCB. It's probably a little messy, a little toxic, whatever. But since we've had the topic lately in the community about building flexible circuits for repairing CoCo keyboards, you might want to check this out if that interests you and see if it's something that you could possibly do by hand. Looks like a big job either way, but you can check it out. Dr. Hartnett's made good information available for us.
Yeah, definitely possible for somebody who wanted to take it on.
Okay, one more. Here's a project called PC Basic. Technology of the 80s, available here and now. So basically what we've got, so PC Basic says run classic games and legacy basic applications designed for MS-DOS systems, IBM PC, PC Junior, or Tandy 1000. PC Basic aims for bug compatibility with Microsoft GW Basic, runs ASCII tokenized and protected basic programs, and supports the Microsoft binary format for full interchangeability of data files. Microsoft binary format, but there is talking about how floating point values are actually stored in the data files. Very cool stuff. PC Basic supports GW Basic, Basic A, PC Junior, Cartridge Basic, and Tandy 1000 Basic. It runs on every platform that supports Python. And that's pretty much anything modern that you care about. PC Basic is free and open source software released under the GNU General Public License version 3. So what does all this mean? If you are somebody who likes to write in BASIC, or if you've got some old BASIC programs laying around from back in the day, and you'd like to run them without having to collect vintage hardware and making it work, well, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast if you don't want to collect vintage hardware and make it work. But sometimes practicality inserts itself into situations. Anyway, this might be something that you want to look into if you enjoy programming in BASIC anyway. It's an open source BASIC interpreter. Sounds like it target anything that'll run Python. So presumably it's a Python-based interpreter. And shows pictures of some cool stuff running. So if you want to brush up on your Microsoft BASIC skills, GW Basic or whatever, here's a tool you can use.
Cool.
Very cool stuff. All right, well, let's again running a little long, so why don't we take another little break and hear from our sponsors.
Meet Dr. Bjorn Vittore, one of 3,300 scientists who work on ATLAS, analyzing data from the Large Hadron Collider.
We are truly on the brink of discovering the elusive God particle, the particle that gives all other particles mass.
When Dr. Vittore needs to crunch numbers quickly, there's only one tool he turns to.
I first encountered Dynacalcs when I was at Fermilab in 1984. Our primary field was a Hazelwood Helix running OS9. It looked like a giant power supply with a small 6809 board attached. But the operating system was way ahead of its time. Very powerful. We were provided load versus displacement data and used the Dynacalc to determine hysteresis at different positions of coil actuators. Dynacalc handles the calculations where the previous Apple II running VisiCalc simply lacked memory to complete the task.
Dynacalc is easy to use, easy to afford, yet sophisticated enough to meet the most demanding requirements.
I still keep a CoCo 3 in my office with Dynacalc, just a press of the clear key away. It's an invaluable tool that allows me to enter data and equations quickly.
Whether you're performing basic accounting, solving engineering problems, or even searching for the Higgs boson, Dynacalc is up to the task.
Dynacalc allows me to perform complex work in a straightforward manner. I wouldn't use any other spreadsheet.
Powerful, simple, Dynacalc.
All right, now we're back. Let's see. Now here's kind of a funny one. Either of you guys remember a TV show called Airwolf?
Oh yeah,
I do.
Yeah, and the Magic Helicopter. Jan Michael Vincent, I think, was the star of the show, and who, as a kid, I always had the impression I was supposed to know who he was before Airwolf, but I didn't. So I don't know what he was originally famous for. But anyway, and I never quite got how the show started either. Something about somebody stole the helicopter, but then they made a deal with the government so they could keep it if they did stuff for the government, or it was something like that. Anyway, no big deal. So apparently there's an episode of Airwolf that's from 1984 called Moffat's Ghost. And I guess there's a YouTube series called Behind the Screens, and I don't know much about it. It sounds like they look for like code snippets in movies and TV shows and try to do, figure out what it's about or whatever. I don't know. But in this episode, there's some code that displays some sort of hex dump or whatever, and I'm not really sure what the point of it is in the episode, but one way or another, that not only displays this hex dump or whatever, at some point they actually get a listing of the code, and it's AppleSoft Basic, so it's Microsoft Basic running on an Apple II. And whoever these people are, they're able to get enough of this code to kind of put the program together on the Apple II, and they could run it, and it basically just generates random hexadecimal numbers. Fun, right? But then the cool part is that it actually had a bug in it. and so they were able to fix the bug and actually, make it work more like how it was intended to work, but not how it actually worked on the show, I guess. Anyway, now in light of recent discussions on CoCo list of the R&D function in BASIC, I'll tell you what I think the bug amounted to. Is in AppleSoft. So unlike, so in CoCo Basic or Color Basic, you do R&D, and then in parentheses you put a number. It's like a maximum number. So if you did like R&D 15, you'd get a random number between 0 and 15, I guess, or 1 and 15, either one. But probably 0 and 15. But in AppleSoft Basic, they didn't do that. And R&D just returned a random number between 0 and 1. And so what you're supposed to do is, you would do, and what they did in the code apparently is they did 15 times R&D, just parentheses for the function, right? But what they really wanted was a number between 0 and 15 that they could then turn into 0 to F, right? But when you the R&D function will never return a flat 1. And so when you multiply by 15, it then truncates down. And so by 15 times R&D, you only get a number from 0 to 14. That's the bug. And so they changed it to 16 times R&D. And so then you get a random number from 0 to 15 that you could then convert to hexadecimal and whatever. So long story short, huh? But anyway, so the beauties of the R&D function, and then there's that's one of the beautiful things about Color Basic is the R&D function wasn't as broken as it is in AppleSoft, so that you could just say R&D, 16 or whatever, and get your 1 to 16 or 1 to 15 or whatever. Anyway, I don't know if that was interesting to anybody else or not, but there you go.
You definitely should go watch it and link. It's pretty cool, and I think they actually had a picture of the listing that appeared in the show.
Yeah, so pretty cool stuff. And if nothing else, it might provoke an Airwolf marathon, which would be kind of cool. All right. The next one. So normally I wouldn't put in stuff about the sales things, but these are kind of like, this is a pretty special case. And so Glenn Dahlgren, who was kind of the guy behind the old Sundog Systems, has popped up and is selling some new old stock Sundog software on eBay. And not just on eBay, but he also popped up on Facebook with a list of the games available and basically said, if you're interested in more than one, then contact me and I'll cut you a deal. So if you're interested in padding your stock of Sundog software, you may want to get on Facebook and contact Glenn at check out the link provided and see if you can get a deal on it. Pretty exciting stuff. What do you think, Neil? Did you pad out your Sundog collection?
I bought a few. That's really cool. I'll never forget when I was going through eBay and I saw those posted there. I was like, what the heck? It felt like I was going back in time.
Yeah, no, that was kind of exciting.
Some cool titles.
All right, moving on. We got a post from, okay, I'm sure I'm going to mess this up. To Jovan Trujillo. Let's say Jovan Trujillo. Jovan, or if that's not your name, then hopefully you know I'm talking about you. Feel free to send me an email. Tell me how I'm messing it up. Anyway, he's posted a Color Computer Facebook group. Says, do any of you guys solve Project Euler problems with CoCo Basic? I'd love to see your solutions. I just did problem 11 with CBM Basic, and then he posts CBM Basic. That's Commodore Basic solution. So what is a Project Euler? Is like this is a website dedicated to the fascinating world of mathematics and programming. And so basically you've got a website where they post a bunch of different kind of problems that you're supposed to, the idea is for you to figure out how to solve the problems, particularly to write code to solve the problems. And it's supposed to, be a fun way to play with math and computers. And so, if we don't already have people working on Project Euler stuff with the CoCos, either with Color Basic or Microware C or whatever else, then we probably should, right? So guys, get out your web browser and go to Project Euler and start picking out some projects. And if you do some of that, I'd love to see your entries and your results or whatever. I think that'd be cool. All right. Well, so the next one. So this is from Jamie Lee Cho. You guys remember this guy? I remember he popped up.
I remember the name.
Seemed like it was a year ago. He popped up kind of out of nowhere, and he had some stuff he'd written with CMOC, I guess. Random CoCo 3 code written with CMOC. If you look at his GitHub repository, he's got some various things that he's written related to the CoCo and whatever else. What this is CoCo Mini Lisp. Says this is an initial point of Rule Uyama's Mini Lisp to the Tandy Color Computer. I don't know who Rule Uyama is. I don't know much about Mini Lisp, although I know Lisp is a programming language with lots of silly parentheses. That's always the joke. Lisp stands for lots of insanely silly parentheses, which is a reference to the way the code looks when you write it out. So anyway, haven't tried this out. I'm not a Lisp person. If you are a Lisp programmer, you may want to check it out. It sounds like he's got some example programs out here. Anyway, so it might be a fun way to experiment with a new programming language, or at least a new implementation of Lisp on the Color Computer. So thank you, Jamie Lee Cho, for sharing that. Very cool stuff. Okay. Here's another one that I think is pretty cool. This is from Tim Thayer. Now we've covered information about some projects from Paul Thayer previously, and apparently Tim is Paul's brother. Anyway, Tim Thayer, available in the near future, hopefully. CoCo Stud, and so he's got a link to a video. And so basically, he's got a poker program that runs on the CoCo. And what I hear is written in color basic on the CoCo 3. Pretty good looking graphics, or at least considering that you're doing a casino style of card game. And it looks like a lot of fun. If you're the kind of person that likes to play, gambling style games on a computer, it looks like it'd be a fun game to play. You guys do any kind of card games on computers?
I used to play Gin, the original CoCo 1 and 2 cartridge.
Oh, yeah? It looks like it's time for you to learn some poker.
This game, the game looks great. The screenshots are nice, and I think this would be a good candidate for a cartridge.
Look good.
Yeah, I think it'd be so cool. Be cool too. I reached out to Tim and Paul both, trying to persuade them to get this on a cartridge. Not sure if Tim was convinced yet. We'll see. Hopefully he'll be moved, and maybe we can see that on a cartridge. Pretty cool stuff, huh? Okay, well, moving on. Here we go. Demonstration of an NTSC CP400 with integrated controller. This is from Ernani Chiaffi. I have no idea if that's the correct pronunciation or not. So, CP400, now that's a Brazilian clone of the color computer. Normally it would be a PAL-M video. I think it's PAL-M. Yeah. Anyway, it's not the European PAL and it's not NTSC. It's kind of a mix between the two. But I suspect, I think it's clocked at basically the same as normal NTSC, and so probably not hard to convert one to just do NTSC video, which is probably what's been done here. And they're playing Tut's Tomb in the video. So what's the point? What's the big deal? Well, if you kind of get to about a minute into the video, a minute 20 or so, you'll see. So on the CP400, on the cartridge, instead of coming in from the right and plugging into the CP400, normally a cartridge, if you've got one, there's a place in the front that kind of has a cover or whatever that lifts up, and you push it from front to back into the cartridge, into the CP400. But what we have here is that cartridge door or whatever has been removed, and somebody's got some sort of black plastic that's put in its place with a neon green, looks like a thumbstick. Looks like a thumbstick from an Xbox controller to me, an Xbox 360 controller. But they appear to be using that as a joystick. So basically they've got this thumbstick kind of one way or another installed on the CP400 so they can use the joystick from that cartridge space. I think it looks pretty cool.
It is.
Are you guys
cool.
looking at this?
Yeah, I like the way, like you said, it's just integrated right into the top cover. Pretty cool.
Yeah, so it looks pretty neat. And so the video is really about demoing some of these games being while it kind of points back down to the controller. So it's a pretty neat little thing going on down there in Brazil. Maybe one of our Brazilian friends that knows more about this could write into us and let us know what's going on with that. That'd be cool to hear about. All right. Speaking of Brazilian friends, Guillaume. Guillaume. Maybe is Guillaume Brazilian or is he
Canadian?
French?
Canadian.
Yeah, okay. I completely got that wrong. All right, not speaking of our Brazilian friends, speaking of our Canadian friends, Guillaume Major. I don't know it must be getting late here. Guillaume has announced a new version of CoCo SDC Explorer, and that's version 0.30. New version of CoCo SDC Explorer, added some features, home/end navigation keys, shift left and shift right. File selection by typing up to the first 4 letters. An option to toggle disk directory sorting, that's Shift S. Source code is available if it inspires CoCo programmers. Very exciting. So that's going to be available at colorcomputerarchive.com, of course, which is Guillaume's site. So Very exciting. Thank you, Guillaume. Sorry about screwing up your nationality there. All right. Okay, here's a topic from the Color Computer mailing list, originated, I think, by Glenn Hewlett. It says, let's figure out the best method to compile sprites for the CoCo. So this is something I think we touched on before, the notion of compiled sprites. So and other so sprites and 2D graphics, sprites basically refers to things that move around on the screen. So typically something controlled by a player, or maybe the computer controlled enemies, something like that. In many machines, sprites are actually hardware objects. You move the sprites by just writing a new location to a register somewhere. The Color Computer does not have any such hardware, not even the Color Computer 3. So any sort of sprite action on the Color Computer is being handled by the 6809, which is, of course, our CPU and, of course, our graphics chip and sound chip as well. And so one of the ways to make sprites faster is to create sprite-specific code for drawing the sprites. So rather than the sprite being an object of in data that you point code at and say, go move this there or there, instead you actually have literally code for draw sprite 1 and then erase sprite 1 and then draw sprite 3, erase sprite 3, that sort of stuff. And so this is called compiled sprites. I would call it compiled sprites, whether they're literally compiled by a tool or even if you've written it by hand, which is really what I've got in Farfall. They're essentially compiled sprites, but I actually wrote the code by hand. Why? Because I was too lazy to write a tool to do it for me. Sounds a little weird, but so the notion here is a little kind of mini project going on in public where people are trying to figure out how to make sprite compilers and how to analyze the data for sprites and then choose the best instruction stream for laying down those sprite data in memory. And so it's definitely an in-depth technical topic involving esoteric facts about the 6809 assembly language and that sort of thing. So if that's interesting to you, definitely check it out. If it's not, well, you can be forgiven. So now the next link, also from Glenn Hewlett, this is to his blog, Zilog Z80 to Motorola 6809 transcode, part 22, quick and dirty speed test. Now this is his blog where he's taking the Pac-Man arcade code written for the Z80 and he's manually translating it to 6809 code. And so he's posted a link to a video on YouTube to show kind of work in progress. Now, based on the work in progress, I'd say that his sprite compiler or whatever he's doing is working very well because those sprites are moving really well in the video. Very exciting stuff. So if you doubt the importance of the previous link, then check out this link. Did you guys check out that video?
I did. And
yeah, it's awesome.
I was blown away. I can't believe how smooth that was running.
Yeah, definitely. All I could say was wow.
It's a very good blog as well. I've been enjoying whenever he puts an update in there, following along with it.
Yep. Yeah, Glenn, I think, was the one who kind of came on the scene back around Christmas and said that he was somewhat inspired by this show to get back involved in doing this sort of thing. So very, very exciting, very nice Christmas present to hear that, and very exciting to see that he's continuing to do some cool stuff. So proud like an uncle or a father, huh? So very exciting, Glenn. Appreciate your contributions. All right. Getting down to our last few links here. They all kind of tie together. So, all right, here's one from Ed Snyder, an FPGA gimme replacement, an FPGA base gimme replacement. There's not a lot of detail in here. All he really is showing is he's got PLCC plugs that can be pressed into service for mounting an FPGA replacement, a gimme replacement circuit into the socket where a gimme is supposed to go. So sort of a stealth post, but still indicating he's working on that project. So it would be cool. The gimmies are a finite resource. There's only so many of them out there in the world. Some of them are bound to go bad over time, and some of them are bound to have already gone bad. I'm sure many of us have seen that. And so theoretically, we could see a time when we can't get CoCo 3s with working gimme chips, and it'd be nice if we had a replacement. So very cool that project is underway. All right, here's a demo from Brendan Donahue. He's working with Ed on another project called CoCo VGA, which basically is a replacement for the 6847 VDG chip that replaces it with a circuit that outputs VGA video signals. Not content with that, the team has gone on to add some extended modes there, both graphics modes and, in this case, a text mode with 64 columns. So it's a demo of that, and pretty cool stuff. So check it out and see what might be coming to a CoCo near you before too long. Okay, CoCo keyboard membrane replacement. This is from Jim Brain, Retro Innovations. Says, thanks to Ron Klein, I think I found a way to put new membranes on CoCo keyboards. Less good news, it's going to cost $61 per keyboard. So basically, these flexible, these membrane circuits are basically a special kind of circuit board. Not just everybody makes them. And they have a certain amount of expense to getting made. And so if you're going to get them at a reasonable price, you need to make them in a huge quantity, and no one's quite sure that there's a quantity that the CoCo community can support, a big enough quantity. And so we come out with a price in the $60 range, and then it becomes even less obvious that we'll ever support an order big enough to justify the price because everybody runs for the hills. So
yeah.
It's slightly worse that the CoCo 2 and CoCo 3 use different style of keyboard membranes. The CoCo 1, of course, those keyboards use a totally different mechanism for the keys. So you can't just get one membrane to rule them all. You need to have, if you were going to stock them, for example, you'd have to stock separate CoCo 2 and CoCo 3 membranes. And if you really wanted to cover the whole line, you'd need a different set of parts for repairing CoCo 1 keyboards. And is anybody likely to do that? Well, considering how many people scoffed at the price, I'd say not, but maybe something will eventually change. Maybe the prices will come down on those membrane keyboard circuits. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that price is crazy, when you consider what's going into it. And, if it's worth it for somebody to have their original keyboard working, they'll buy one.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think that was a bad price at all. Well, it's not a great price. I mean, it's more than you could buy a new CoCo for that, right? but
yeah.
Considering that they won't be making any new CoCos at some point, the amount of CoCos you can buy for that price will diminish. It depends on how bad you want your original CoCo keyboard to work and how many CoCos you're willing to trash 90% of to get working keyboards. I don't know. Like I said, it's not the price I'd like to be able to pay. I mean, of course, I'd like to get one for $10, right, or less.
Right.
But that's unreasonable. Right. So you have to figure out what is reasonable, and I think some people, if they want the keyboards to work, they're going to have to pay a higher price than what they want. But I think there's a lot of aspects to this general topic, so maybe we'll discuss it a little bit later as a host discussion topic. Along those lines, we got one more news item here. Had someone, interesting name, Cutter McGinnis. It's kind of a cool name. Sounds like somebody should be a character in a book or something. Cutter McGinnis. Anyway, I'm not familiar with Cutter, but posted in the Candy Color Computer Facebook group Says, I don't want to say anything about this, but I will. Or it pains me to read about folks wanting to trick the CoCo out. I appreciate what it is and what it did with what it had. Appreciate what it was, not what it could be morphed into. The digital world it was made for is fascinating all by itself. Now call me a purist, and that's okay with me. Sometimes a 57 Chevy should remain stock. Thank you kindly. And it kind of, as you can imagine, it prompted a number of other comments. But just to introduce that as a point of discussion here, that some people think that adding stuff to the CoCo makes it into something different, and I think that's probably a point where most of us could reach that basic opinion, but the point where it hits there is probably different for each of us too. So again, like I said, I think we'll expand this out as a bigger topic a little bit later in the show. But for now, I think we're going to pay some bills, so to speak, and hear from our sponsors. So give us a little break here, and we'll be back with some feedback.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me. It's Original Gamer Stevie Stroh. Gameplay goodness. Gameplay goodness. Gameplay goodness.
All right, people.
Gameplay goodness.
Thank you so much.
Gameplay goodness.
Yeah.
Gameplay goodness.
Are you ready for this?
Gameplay goodness.
Yeah.
Gameplay goodness.
Are you ready for this?
Gameplay goodness.
Yeah.
Gameplay goodness. Gameplay goodness.
This is how we like to do it.
Gameplay goodness.
All right, people.
Gameplay goodness.
If you're into gaming on the CoCo, then tune in to the Original Gamer Stevie Stroh. See live gameplay, watch interviews with game authors, and be part of the fun. Original Gamer Stevie Stroh, only on YouTube.
Drop it low.
Gameplay goodness.
All right, people.
Gameplay goodness.
Do the flow.
Gameplay goodness.
Yeah.
Gameplay goodness.
Yeah. That's great.
All right, CoCo Cruisers. Now we get to hear from you. So now we'll have some feedback. This one's maybe not from a CoCo Cruiser per se. This is from Ken Gagney. Ken is he's the publisher of Juice.js, which is the last remaining print publication for the Apple II line, and a pretty good target for anybody who'd like to do a print publication for the CoCos. If there's anybody out there who wants to do that. Anyway, Ken's also involved with the podcasters sort of in general, and he's got some podcasts of his own. He contacted me, said, I'm looking for RSS feeds for non-Apple II retro computing news, CoCo, Tandy, Amiga, anything. It can be a blog, a news outlet, a podcast, or a convention, so long as it has an RSS feed. Then it's Ken Gagney. So I told him, well, we do some news on the podcast. Quite a bit of it sometimes, but we don't really have an RSS feed just for the news. I'm not really sure that we have anything that covers that, but maybe we should. So if any of you out there in the CoCo community want to be the CoCo news hound and set up an RSS feed with news bits, I'd certainly be happy to consume some of it. It sounds like Ken would too. So how about it? Somebody get on that. What do you think, Neil? Would you like that?
A cool idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on. The next one is from William or Bill Astle. This is our Canadian friend that drives a really long way from the Great White North or through the Great White North to get to CoCo Fest.
He really does.
We kind of mentioned that, I think, in the last, is it episode 23? Maybe in episode 22. I'm not sure. Anyway, so he responds, while I don't do a stop for the night at a hotel type way stop, I do stop along the way a few times for extended breaks and or naps, with the stops being more frequent as the drive progresses. So thank you, William. I'm glad to have seen you at CoCo Fest. Hope that you've made it home safely. Good to know that you are taking some good precautions so you don't end up a statistic. So definitely let's stay safe out there. Is that what they used to say on the TV show? Something like that.
Yeah.
Mike, you want to read the next one?
Well, sure, since the feedback's from me. It says, Neil, where have you been hiding? This is great stuff you did. I think you're getting comfortable in front of the microphone. Really enjoyed your recounting the 2010 CoCo Fest.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, it was a good part. Enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it. All right, so moving on. The next one comes from Tim Lindner. This is a note to me. Those of you who went to CoCo Fest are aware that I had a demo of my what I call a Games Master cartridge. This is the bank switch ROM cartridge with the addition of the Tandy 1000 audio chip on the cartridge. And so I had a demo running there, playing some cool tunes, making some noise that I think people didn't really expect the CoCo to make. And so Tim has been a part of the MAME or MES project for years. Kind of mentioned to him, or maybe he mentioned to me that he could do the emulation. One way or another, the topic of emulating my cartridge came up, and he said, sure, it sounded like a decent project. I think he called it a weekend project. I sent him some information on like a Friday, telling him what chip I was using and how I had addressed it and that sort of thing. And I think by Sunday afternoon, he wrote me back saying everything was working. So it's probably not available in any version of MAME yet that you can actually download whatever, unless you're downloading source code and building it yourself. I think it has been merged. So eventually, you should be able to emulate my Games Master cartridge in MAME. So if you want to develop programs that use my Game Master cartridge, you don't have to have actual hardware to do it. Or if you don't have the version of MAME yet that includes it, you'll have to hack in his patch. This is, some level of difficulty, not that big a deal. But anyway, I'm sure we can work it out between me, you, and Tim if that's what you want to do, whoever you are. But anyway, it's coming along if you want to be able to use that cartridge. He actually used my demo ROM for testing, so I haven't heard it yet, but I assume that it's working if he told me it was. So good news, for games with good audio on the CoCo. We have that MAME as a development option coming there. So very exciting stuff. All right, Neil, how about you read the last one?
Yeah, for sure. Got a feedback from Kevin Braun, and he also, just like Mike Rowland, was saying that he enjoyed my first-time CoCo Fest memories, and that was really good to hear that. Glad you guys enjoyed it, and he also liked your tech segment on creating games, and he wishes it was longer. So maybe you'll have to do a part 2 on that one, John. And last but not least, he liked Boise Pete and our hard-hitting news show host. That's really good to hear. It's feedback like that keeps us wanting to do this show. That's great. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Very exciting stuff. It's great to hear feedback. That way, lets us know people are actually listening. People actually care about the show. So we'd love to hear from anyone else, whether you want to tell us we're doing a good job or telling us something you don't like. Either way, and like I said, you can reach us all together, feedback at cococrew.org, or any of us individually. Do you have something to say, Neil?
Yeah, I was just going to say, otherwise it's kind of silly. If no one's listening to the show, then we're just kind of talking ourselves here.
Yeah, that would be silly. Okay, well, let's take another little break, maybe pay another bill or two, and we'll be back for the rest of the show.
Inside this week's Rainbow magazine, don't miss our exclusive free CoCo Cat iron-on. And it's only in the Rainbow, the Color Computer Monthly magazine. The Rainbow features more programs, more information, and more in-depth treatment of the Tandy color computer than any other source. The Rainbow is a pot of gold for your color computer. Pick up yours before they're all gone.
All right, CoCo Cruisers. Now we're back for a discussion among the hosts. So the end of our news segment, we had a couple of new projects, 2 or 3 new projects, or ongoing projects at least, to some to enhance the CoCo, some to kind of give the CoCo superpowers, some just to kind of keep them working like they're supposed to. Now, we had the comment from Cutter McGinnis that, sometimes a 57 Chevy should remain stock. So that kind of inspires our topic. So our topic's regarding upgrades for the CoCo. So how far is too far, and maybe how much is too much money. So not sure who wants to open this up, but I just will say, with regards to the 57 Chevy, I've never had a 57 Chevy, but I did have a 56 Pontiac, Pontiac Chieftain, pretty close in some ways to that 57 Chevy. And if you've ever been going down the road at 70 miles an hour in a vehicle like that and had to rely on your big drum brakes for an emergency stop, well, you might consider putting disc brakes and maybe a power master cylinder on. So, just for safety's sake. Now, granted, a CoCo is not a 5,000 pounds of Detroit steel or whatever, but it's still worth thinking that sometimes it's good to have a few upgrades just to bring a machine back in line with more modern standards or building codes or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. What do you guys think, Mike?
Well, I think, first of all, there's room for everybody in the community. People that want to, just like there is in, is a good analogy in the car world, right? There are people that want classic cars with all the classic parts, the correct hubcaps, the correct hood ornaments, and there are people that want to, create a chop top hot rod with all kinds of modern stuff on it. And I have, I know Neil's the same way. We're more kind of on that side of it too, where we like the original CoCo, we like CRTs, we like printers, we like modems. But I'm not against using a CoCo SDC and modern cartridges and expansions. But I generally don't like to mess with what's inside of it. But I also have multiple CoCos. I've got CoCos with 6309s that I've put in them, and but I also keep some some of the original color basic 16K models just so I have an original one.
I think that's what's kind of cool with collecting the CoCos, for example, versus cars, is that you could have an original CoCo and then one that's a little bit modified, whereas not everybody's going to have two 57 Chevys, one modded and one original. I mean, that's kind of far fetched. I guess it's possible, but
yeah, well, yeah, mostly people aren't going to do that, but I mean, think about how many CoCos you've pulled out of a pile that is from some original CoCo person. Basically, they've been using it since the 80s, and you pull the machine out of the pile, and it's got holes drilled in the case and switches installed with wires running all across everything or whatever. I mean, what is period correct at that point? Every episode of or every issue of Rainbow Magazine had a project where you'd add a wire somewhere. or it's part of the spirit of the CoCo anyway to do a certain amount of modifications.
True. So I remember the computer users, CoCo users group I belonged to back in the day. They used to dub it as the true hobbyist computer.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there's a lot of ways to change things. Most of the chips inside were, off the shelf. You could get real data sheets and do things with them. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of interest in the CoCo version of a Trailer Queen or whatever. I don't even care that much about yellowed plastic, honestly, as long as it doesn't look like it's been dipped in nicotine or whatever. There are updates that are things that don't interest me. There's projects that are out there that don't interest me. I'm going to try to avoid naming any of them. But basically, I've got this project, the game cartridge with the audio chip installed on it, right? Now, I think it's cool partly because, I mean, on my cartridge, I've used all through-hole technology, just like back in the day. The chips that I'm using, the audio chip was available in 1983 or 82, one or the other. It could have been on cartridges for the CoCo back in the prime of the CoCo's days if somebody had put it there. The fact that there is a sound pin on the CoCo cartridge port implies to me that somebody thought it'd be a good idea to put sound hardware on a cartridge. So with all that, to me, when you put all that on together, having a cartridge with a sound chip on it just makes total sense. And not only that, but other machines did exactly that same thing in that same period of time. So that's all it takes really for me to kind of think, well, this is a legitimate kind of thing to do in terms of being period correct. And, it's not exactly pristine or whatever, but if we kept everything exactly pristine, we'd all just be fighting it out on eBay for whatever comes up that hasn't been opened yet. And then you'd never open it, right? So, on the other hand, you start, if something come out that added a PowerPC chip as a CPU for the CoCo, especially the PowerPC chip on the CoCo motherboard, I don't think I'd be very interested in that. I mean, sure, you could probably then boot Linux on your CoCo, but are you really booting on a CoCo at that point? You know what I mean? The kind of projects I do like are things that, even if it's to enable something that didn't exist, but if it kind of keeps the CoCo kind of in the game, things that, like being able to plug into HDMI video, even if it's through a SCART port or whatever, I think that's fine. Being able to use storage that you can actually buy, that you can actually plug into a modern machine for exchanging files, I think that makes sense. Some of the like the one that sort of treads the line kind of for me is the CoCo VGA sort of is sort of walking the line a little bit. On the one hand, it's replacing a part with something completely new and different. On the other hand, well, you're really just replacing the old video output with a video output that even VG, at least, is something we can still get monitors to plug into. So I mean, that one's kind of at the line for me. And that's not to say anything bad about it. It's not even to endorse it. It's just to say that's kind of around where I start to think, well, is it still a CoCo once you've done these things to it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it comes down to. It's a very individual, personal thing, as far as what what's too far for you is not too far for somebody else. And like you say, it's not to put down anybody's project or, everybody just kind of has their own opinion, but there's plenty of room in the community for everybody to, be as period correct or way out modern as you want to be.
That's the thing. To draw a parallel to the open source community, there's a lot of things that people do in the open source community that other people in open source or just people in computing in general say, well, that's crazy. I don't give a damn. Who cares? Why would you bother to do that or whatever? And usually it comes down to somebody say, well, I needed it, or, well, I just thought it was interesting to do, something like that, right? And considering that it's open source code and talking about hobbyist contributions, if you're a hobbyist and you just wanted to do something or you had a need for it yourself, well, nobody else can really tell you that it was wrong for you to spend time doing on it as long as you didn't, steal someone else's code or whatever. So it kind of comes back to that. We're all hobbyists here. And so, okay. I mean, you can go off and do a project on your CoCo that I think is ridiculous. Well, a lot of people in the world just think having a project with the cocoa is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And at some level, they're right. I mean, it is a goofy old machine. They're long obsolete in terms of real computing stuff. None of them can really connect to the internet in any meaningful way, even with a serial to telnet adapters or whatever. They're still not really meaningfully on the internet with those. It's a goofy project. It's kind of like operating a steam engine or kind of like hopping up your Model A Ford or something like that, right? It's just something to do that we enjoy, and it's a way to flex our own talents and or skills and just see what we can do with it. And because of that, it's like you say, if you cross my line of what makes it a CoCo project or what makes it an interesting project, that's fine. Unless I'm paying you to do it, then it's none of my business, right? And I'm probably not going to pay you to do any CoCo projects, the possible exception of assembling Farfall cartridges or something like that. So I don't know. Haven't heard much from you, Neil. What do you got to say?
Well, I was also thinking that when it comes to these projects, I mean, there's ones that you have to make physical modifications to your CoCo versus the ones that just are just plug and play. You can always remove whatever the project is or the enhancement and then put it back to stock. So there is that aspect as well, that not all the times you have to actually make a modification to the CoCo.
Yeah, and that's not just a marketing thing, or maybe, I mean, it kind of is, but if you have to drill a hole in your case, you not only have made it less attractive to resell the case, some people will probably be offended by that, right? That you've essentially defaced an artifact, right? I mean, the fact is there's a lot of them, and it's not exactly a crime against nature. But there is a limited number of them, and depends on how much damage you do to something. It's, how big a deal it is. We're talking about, I kind of had the example, if you could put a PowerPC chip in as a CPU of the CoCo, that's sort of ridiculous. But if you do it inside put it on the motherboard, that's one thing. If you do it with a cart, kind of like that Vectrex 32 we mentioned earlier, and plug it into the side, well, that might be something else, right? So plug it in with a cart, you don't have to modify the case. It might be an interesting toy at that point for me. So so there you go. I've turned around on almost the exact same project, just inside the case versus not. So
I think Neil's got a good point about being able to keep it returned to stock, and that definitely doesn't violate it. And of course, even back when the CoCo was out in the 80s, they had CPU cartridge or a CPM cartridge, you could plug in and you could run, it has Z80 on it. You could run CPM software on your CoCo. So, but that didn't alter anything, but it enhanced its capability. DriveWire is another one, does the same thing, but doesn't affect your CoCo.
So, well, I think we've kind of, or at least addressed the how far is too far aspect. Well, what about the how much is too much money? In terms of like the keyboard membranes, $60. On one hand, $60 is not gonna hurt many of us. If you're spending money on kind of a ridiculous thing anyway, surely if you can put up money to buy a CoCo, you could put up another $60 to repair the CoCo. But you could probably buy another CoCo for $30 or $40, or CoCo 2. Sometimes you can even luck out and get a CoCo 3 for $40 or $50. Is it worth spending more than that to repair one?
Well, again, that comes down to the individual and what they're wanting to do. And I think when I mentioned earlier about $60 not being a bad price, I was looking at it more from the the cost to manufacture something like that. That's not a crazy amount. Whether it's a crazy amount to pay for your color computer to get an original keyboard, it just depends on how badly you want to restore an original keyboard.
Right. Well, of course, there's an individual choice there, and some people may not want to pay more than $1. And a lot of people will come out and say, "Well, you can get the AT keyboard adapter from or PS2 keyboard adapter from Cloud9 for $55 or whatever they charge." Is that the measure? The fact that you could get an alternative for $5 less? I don't think so. But it's
that's probably more to the point in the community. I think when people announce something, there tends to be this big backlash of poo-pooing ideas, and that's not not always the best way to handle it.
Yeah, well, that is true. Like I say, a lot of people don't know as much as they think they know about what it actually costs to produce some of these things. Having been part of the cartridge production, and even the box for the cartridges for that production, probably got as close to free labor on that as you possibly get, with Tim volunteering his stuff. and it still costs some money to get those boxes produced. And looking at productions for the hardware that goes into the Retro Tinker joypad adapters that Neil sells, and you notice how I renamed it there, Neil?
Yeah, I like that. Got the branding in there.
It's like, we brought out the cartridge cases, and people said, "Well, you should be able to get those for $3 a piece or something." I said, "Well, that would sure be nice, but we can't get them for $3 a piece." And I don't even think you can get a reasonable alternative for $3 a piece.
Even 3D printed would cost more than that.
And certainly it could take a lot more time. But, like I said, people just don't know what they don't know sometimes. And then a lot of people kind of shoot their mouths off about, "Oh, I would never pay that," or whatever. Like there used to be a joke about how somebody get pulled over, and how the policemen come up to the front door and the driver rolls down the window, and the policeman reaches in and punches the driver in the mouth, and then gives him a ticket or whatever. And then he walks over to the passenger side and punches the passenger in the mouth. And the passenger said, "What was that for?" And the passenger said, "Well, that's so when you drive off and you say, 'Well, I wish he'd have come over here and punched me in the mouth.'" People sometimes talk a little before they ought to. So I don't know. The thing that kills me is when somebody has to announce that, "Well, I'm not going to pay that," or "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to buy one of those." Like, okay, don't buy it, but you have to make a big announcement about it. I mean, do I care that you're not going to buy it? It's like they're trying to poison the project just because they don't think it's a good idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and it's right. I guess that's with all these projects. If you're not interested in it or you don't want it, just don't buy it. But you don't have to go trying to rally everybody against the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think that's one of those touching on a kind of a long-standing issues in the community, and maybe it's not the time to solve it right now, but we could probably do a whole podcast on discussions of long-term community issues. But no, we love the community. We do. We love you guys. Please keep listening. But it doesn't mean that sometimes, we're like a family. Sometimes families have issues. All right. Well, Well, what do you think? Is there any more to say here?
Maybe the only other thing we could touch on is when projects get too expensive.
Yeah. Well, what's too expensive?
But I guess that also counts on what the project even is.
Well, how much price pressure, how much back pressure do you get on the joypad adapters? Do people say, "Ooh, that's just too expensive"?
No, I haven't. Luckily, I haven't got that. I mean, I haven't heard any negative feedback for the price. So I think at the $40 mark, it's kind of right at the right price for it.
Okay. Okay.
But what I was kind of referring to is, you get into these crazy projects where people are building a whole new computer and then charging $300-400. I mean, at that point, it's out of control.
Well, stuff does get out of control. Well, it's like we had the Kickstarter for the CoCo 3 FPGA. That price was not necessarily unreasonable if you consider what had to go into producing the product being offered. But the price tag was still pretty big. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I do see a lot of projects that's another traditional thing in the community is somebody will announce a project and it will get a little traction that people say, "Oh, that's cool. But what about if you did this? And how about if you added that? And what if you put wings on the pony? And what if you gave it a horn too? And painted it pink? And pretty soon you got to have a pink flying unicorn." Well, nobody can produce a pink flying unicorn, so the project falls apart. I don't know if we've had too many of those lately. We used to get a lot more of them.
Yeah, I remember that. The problem with that is the projects never finish either, right? I mean, if you keep adding stuff to it, nobody can ever finish what they originally intended on making.
Yeah. Well, feature creep is definitely an ongoing problem in the community. Well, so I guess it comes down to maybe there's need some sort of resolution on this. So if you want to do a project or, some of the how far is too far, how much is too much, kind of concentrated on the demand side of the project. But when you're doing the production side of the project, maybe you need to at least think about who are your potential customers and what do they really want. And, it's probably up to the producer to kind of control some of the feature creep and say, well, I can paint the pony pink, but I can't make it fly and it's not going to have a horn. You know what I mean? You just have to stand up for some of that. And, sometimes, like I say, sometimes you just have to be the one that knows that the project, what the limitations are on the project, and not let people's demands get ahead of what's possible.
Yeah, I think in the end, if you're producing something, whether it's software or a physical piece of hardware, whatever it is, you should be making it for yourself, and something that you would want. That's when you make the best products, is you're making something for yourself. And other people will follow. Or they won't if it's something crazy.
Well, good. That's true. I think that makes good sense. All right. Well, anything else?
I think that's a wrap.
All right. I used to say if we beat this to death, but Steve Strawbridge kind of makes fun of me on that one. So, so we've gotten all we're getting out of this one. How's that? Okay. Well, thanks for listening to our discussion, and we'll take another short break here, and we'll be back with the rest of the show.
Were your taxes a mess last year? Do you look at your bank balance and wonder where all the money went? Then you need CoCo Accountants 2. This home and small business accounting program is all you need to answer the 3 big questions about your money. Where did it come from? Where did it go? And what can I deduct from my taxes? Spend a few minutes with your canceled checks, credit cards, receipts, and payroll stubs. The 32K tape version stores 450 entries in a single file, 500 for disk. The 64K version stores 900 entries on tape or disk. Our happy customers say this is the most useful program they own, and you'll agree. Only $34.95, tape or disk. CoCo Accountant 2 from Federal Hill Software. Fine products for the Color Computer, Dragon, and MC10.
All right, CoCo Cruisers, welcome to the tech segment for episode 24 of the CoCo Crew. I'm, of course, your host, John Linville, and today we are going to be talking a bit about developing software to run on a cartridge for the CoCo. So it's just going to be a little primer, an overview of, what's involved with developing on a cartridge. But first we'll start with, why do you even want to do it? I mean, what's the point of developing for a cartridge? There are a few technical reasons to consider. One of which, of course, is that when you're running off a cartridge, the load time is, super fast. I mean, it's basically, by definition, already in memory as soon as you plug the cartridge in. It's hard to get any faster than that. The other thing is, if you have your software package on a cartridge, you're minimizing any other sort of dependencies. You're kind of implies that you're not requiring OS 9 to run or anything like that. You're not requiring other software because you've already got it there loaded up on your cartridge. There is the issue of the cartridge being a piece of hardware that actually plugs into your CoCo. If you package your software to run on a cartridge, you have the capability of designing a cartridge that actually extends the hardware on the color computer. And so a topic that's been popular lately is adding a sound chip, an audio chip of some sort. An alternative sound chip might be a text-to-speech kind of chip or something like that. But, either of those chips would be reasonable to put on a cartridge. There might be other things. You might put something like a blitter chip on a cartridge that would halt the CPU and move memory around. Something like what was done on the Williams arcade games, like Stargate or Robotron. Of course, you can do cartridges that have bank switching for ROM so that you can extend the amount of memory available to your computer that way. And, not just ROM, but theoretically you could have RAM on a cartridge. Just really depends on what you need it for and what you want to do with it, how expensive you mind making the cartridge. So along those lines, since you can extend the hardware, you can make sure and include any prerequisite hardware for the software that you're using. So, if you're doing music software, for example, you could include the sound chip that your music software works with, or you could include a DAC, and extra DAC or something like that. I mean, that's basically what the Orchestra 90 was, is 2 DACs and some software to drive them, right? That's a good technical driver for why you'd want to put your software on a cartridge, because you required certain hardware for the application you want to do. There's one that's a little known feature on the CoCo 1 and 2. We all know about the high-speed poke. Most people at least are aware of it. There's this magic thing you can do to make your CoCo run faster, right? Well, turns out, if you've paid attention to some of the earlier tech segments, I've discussed that, and the high-speed poke has a couple of variations. One is just to go straight into the double clock mode, and that only really works while there's no video being displayed, so like during the vertical refresh, a part of the video signal. And so you would have to turn that back off if you want a video to be displayed. And if you don't turn it back on, if you don't care about the video, but you don't turn it back on quick enough, well, it turns out that video display is what's refreshing your RAM. And so you'll eventually crash if you don't turn it back on. But anyway, one of the variations of the double speed poke is a what's called an address dependent mode, and where it will automatically manage the double speed based on the addresses that you're fetching from. And so basically, if your software is executing out of RAM, it'll leave it in the single speed, the 0.89 megahertz or 890 kilohertz, however you want to look at that. It'll leave it in the slower clock mode, and when you're fetching code out of ROM, the C000 addresses or the basic ROMs, then it'll leave it in the double clock mode. And so therefore, if you write your code to run out of a cartridge, and then your code kicks in this address dependent clocking mode, then your program will tend to run, I don't have the numbers here, I'm guessing 30% faster, 50% faster maybe. I guess it depends on how much time you spend doing what. If you're mostly just running code out of the ROM, you'll run quite a bit faster. If you spend a lot of time manipulating data in RAM, which includes graphics, but could include other data, it won't run quite as much faster. But so anyway, there's one good technical solid reason why you'd want to run your program on a cartridge, is just to give it the faster execution. Aside from technical reasons, there might be psychological or human reasons why you'd want to run your code from a cartridge. So why are we doing this kind of silly hobby anyway? Well, we have something left over from our childhood that some itch we want to scratch, something we want to prove to ourselves or whatever. And so you apply that over to why would you want your code to run on ROM? Well, that seemed, I remember being a kid and thinking that was really the most professional option. You could either buy a package in a box with a plastic cartridge, you plug into the CoCo and everything just runs. The step down from that was a plastic baggie that hangs on a hook with a Ziploc closure, and inside was maybe a floppy disk or maybe even a tape. It just didn't seem quite as professional. And granted that software in a plastic bag was emblematic of that era to some degree, but still, it just didn't seem quite as professional, quite as big time as actually getting something on a cartridge. So if you want to produce something and kind of prove that you could have done it back in the day, you kind of feel like you want to prove you could have done it on a cartridge back in the day, right? I don't know. It makes sense to me. But so the other thing is just the fact that traditionally has been a bit out of reach. I know back around 2012 when I was first writing Farfall and started thinking that Farfall felt like it should be a cartridge game, it was all but out of reach to how to do that, other than just maybe a copy for myself. About that time, Mark Blair released his cartridge PCB design so that you could get those made kind of in quantity if you wanted to, but there was still no real solution for cases, really. At least no particularly good one, in my opinion. And so the whole cartridge thing has always felt a little bit out of reach, and now I've got a bunch of cases and I have designs for multiple kinds of cartridge PCBs, and so none of that's a problem for me now. I know where to get the labels. I even have boxes, so packaging it all up for me now is very easy. But for a lot of the people in the community, that if they felt like I did and if they wanted to produce software and cartridge, they don't have the same resources or access to the same things that I do now. If you want access to that, well, feel free to talk to me. Come to me with a game proposal. I'm sure we can work something out. But I've made that offer many times, and that's sort of what prompted this discussion here. Is a lot of people might have thought about it, but they don't really know how to produce something on the cartridge. So let's talk about this, and then maybe we can get to the other conversation. So aside from the I want to make professional CoCo software, which may be a little silly these days, but something I felt. But there is also an argument for collector value, and so we've been having some discussion on Facebook, and in one of those threads, our podcasting partner Neil Blanchard spoke up, and on the topic of why you would want something on a cartridge, and he says, "My 2 cents. ROM cartridges for games are king, and in my humble opinion will never reach a dead point. Ask any serious video game collector on any retro platform and they will agree it's the best media. Why? Number 1, they stand to the test of time. Heck, Atari 2600 game carts buried in a New Mexico landfill over 3 decades ago and they still work. If that isn't proof, I don't know what is. Number 2, you have a physical, tangible piece of media to hold and collect. Number 3, spine labels. Collectors love seeing game carts lined up on a shelf. Number 4, insanely fast loading time. We mentioned that in the tech segment, technical reasoning. Number 5, absolutely zero knowledge on learning how to load the game. Well, that's certainly true. Once you figure out that it's a cartridge and sort of what it's for, you don't need any extra training on type this or load this first and then that or whatever. Number 6, extra hardware support, i.e. bank switching, MMU, audio chip. Again, we covered that under the technical reasons. Number 7, game developers can charge more money for their game and buyers have no problem paying extra to have a cartridge versus a digital download disc image. This assertion has proved to be a little arguable. So there's some people who may not have full confidence in that statement from Neil, but I tend to agree with him myself. And then number 8, this is the one I like best. ROM cartridges are period correct and are just simply cool. So there. From a collector's perspective, the ROM cartridges are just cool and the best media. From the developer's perspective, they were kind of not just anybody could produce a ROM cartridge back in the day. Even today, not just everyone can produce one without going to some extra trouble. So it's kind of it sets you apart a little bit. But again, those are all kind of those are the psychological reasons and the technical reasons we already discussed. But minimizing dependencies on other stuff, you'll be able to extend the hardware, feature of the CoCo lets you clock a little bit faster. That's all cool stuff. So anyway, maybe I've convinced you that it's a good idea. But how do you go about doing it? What are the technical issues involved with developing for a cartridge? Well, so it kind of depends. Probably the first one that comes to mind is it influences you your choice of what languages you can use for developing your code. And of course, as usual, especially for retro computing, you can do anything with assembly language, and so assembly language reveals itself once again as a great choice if you want to develop code to run on a cartridge. Now, of course, that assumes that you are competent in assembly language and fluent or whatever, and not everyone is. So thankfully, it's not really your only choice. So moving on, so if you have what I call C-like compiled languages, and I don't mean just the language itself being C-like, although many of them are. I mean C-like as in the way they're compiled. So, C compiles straight down to executable machine language code for the processor. Typically, you can have you can mix and match whatever you like in computer science, right? So you could produce a C compiler that that produces something other than an executable code. But for the most part, C compilers produce executable code for specific processors, and many other compilers do. And in fact, and when I use Pascal as an example, but I started using Pascal years ago between Turbo Pascal and the Pascal I use on Unix systems, both of which produced machine executables. So in that sense, those compilers were C-like compilers in terms of this discussion. But anyway, C compilers will tend to produce executable binaries. Typically, you can you can influence the linker on how to put those binaries together. Sometimes that's enough to be able to either directly build the headers, or in this case, lack of headers, just as you want them, and position code exactly as you want. Sometimes you still will have to, depending on the tools, you might have to write an extra tool that'll take whatever your linker produces and massage it into something that is suitable for a ROM image on the CoCo. It sort of just depends. And again, this is just an overview, so we're not going to go into every detail of every kind of tool. I will say I've got at least 2 different C compilers that I can use to produce CoCo ROM images that will execute. Mostly it involves some tweaking of what's called startup code, which is extra object files that get linked into your C program as part of the final step of creating a binary. Anyway, so typically with C-like compiled languages, you'll do something like that. Now, the other kind of compiled languages I'm going to refer to as Pascal-like compiled languages, meaning how Pascal compilers sort of did it back in the day. And like I said, Turbo Pascal was not like this, but Pascal, like on the Apple or on the CoCo, typically it compiled the language down into an intermediate form known as P code or bytecode. Basic 09 was actually kind of in this category where it compiled down to I code, which was a lot like P code. Java is kind of like this, where Java compiles down into Java bytecode, but what you end up with is stuff that doesn't actually execute directly on the compiler or on the CPU. So you need another program that runs on the CPU and then takes that bytecode or P code or I code or whatever you call it, and interprets that and runs the real program. So if you were going to use a language like that to produce a ROM image for the CoCo, you're probably already starting off the the hard way. But in some cases, you might be able to take something like that and take that interpreted binary, the binary that does the interpretation. You might be able to get it to run out of ROM, and either directly or by having an extra piece of code that loads it out of the ROM and puts it into memory, and then puts whatever it's looking at, the actual P code or byte code or I code or whatever, and puts that somewhere, and then kind of fixes everything up. It's possible, but that's going to depend a lot on exactly which language you're dealing with, and so you're going to need to know a lot about how the compiler works, how the CoCo works, and exactly how everything fits together to make something like that possible. But again, I'd rate that as possible, but a big "it depends" question mark over it. So moving down, assembly, C, Pascal, or even Basic 09, whatever. What about just plain BASIC? Well, I haven't seen it actually work yet, but we have a strong theory on how we could get a BASIC program to load out of ROM. Essentially what would matter, or what would happen, is you'd have a small piece of machine code that would execute first thing out of ROM, and would take the BASIC program out of the storage in ROM and move it out into RAM. So it's almost like loading it from a cassette, but instead it's coming out of the ROM. And then it would go in and fix up some of the same pointers that would get fixed up if you did a C load, for example. Except in this case, it'll be fixing up based on what happened from loading it out of ROM. And then once it's all done, then you just would jump back into the BASIC interpreter, and then you'd be running your BASIC program. If you want to do something like this, feel free to reach out. I'll give you the information that I have. It might even finally prompt me to see if I can make it work. And we'll see if we can get it to work for your program too. Anyway, so the point of all this is you're going to have to end up with what I would call an absolute binary or a raw binary for your image to go into ROM, and that's essentially it's a memory dump of what would be programmed into your ROM and sitting out there in the CoCo memory. Now, almost every assembler can produce this sort of thing. This raw binary, it's different from a bin file. The bin files that are used in Disk Extender Color Basic. And do they call them bin files for Dragon DOS too? I'm not sure, because those are even a different thing. But one way or another, this is different from those binaries because it doesn't have the headers that are used there. These are literally images out of memory, so it's, the first byte maps to the first byte at a certain location in memory, and the second byte's exactly what's at the second location in memory, that sort of thing. These would typically be saved if you were going to save them on your disk or whatever. They'd have an extension like .rom or .ccc. I guess CCC is for Color Computer Cartridge, something like that. Anyway, so that's what you need to be producing. Like I said, if it's assembly language, pretty much straight up, no problem. Your C output, you basically are just going to take whatever comes from your C program and link it to an image that starts out like this raw image from the assembler. And so you end up with an extended version of that. Basic or some other language, we'd have to figure out the details, but I think it could be done. It's just a matter of how badly you want to do it and how much you need to use that particular language. Okay, so if you're going to produce a ROM that's going to auto-start, or if you're going to produce one that just sits out there in memory and waits for it to be exec, then you probably in both of those cases you would do what's called an org of it starts at hex C000, which org stands for origin, and it's just an assembler directive to say this is the first address that I want to write out to. So when you're producing code from this program, start the address there at C000. And so again, if you auto start, it's going to start at C000. If there's some weird things you could do to the hardware design on your ROM PCB that could change that. There's no good reason to do that I know of, but, maybe if you know of a good reason, we could figure out why, but whatever. In terms of, if you have something you want to start with exec, you don't have to exec from there either. It just, you could have a different entry point into your ROM. You're just going to have to document that and, depend on your users to handle it correctly. Probably not the nicest thing to do, but if you have a reason to do it, well, hey, more power to you. Of course, the auto start stuff on the hardware front is going to need your Q, which is one of the clock signals, a quadrature clock. I'm pretty sure it's the Q one that gets tied back to cart. And cart is your interrupt line coming in from your cartridge. Now, there's a little weirdness there. If you had an auto start cartridge that also had hardware on it that generated interrupts, you'd need some way to arbitrate between the auto start signal and real cartridge interrupts. So that's a matter of a design for your hardware designer. Something that could be done, but in that case, you're not talking about just a normal game program. You're talking about something that's got hardware on the cartridge and the software that goes with it. Anyway, if you're looking at that kind of stuff, you probably already know that, but I've stated it. One more thing there, if your program is not an auto start cartridge and you're not just expecting it to exec only, if you're expecting to plug it in and then have it augment the basic, which would be, like something that takes the place of a floppy drive controller, then instead of starting at C000, you need the ASCII values for the capital O and capital S at C000. And in that case, you don't tie the clock signal back to cart. This is just random facts. It's not specific to anything new here. I just thought I'd mention it since we're on the topic of cartridge programming. So when you are programming for a cartridge, you need to think about memory allocation, because now instead of putting everything in RAM, some amount of your cartridge, your programming running from cartridge is going to be in ROM. And, ROM, of course, means read-only memory. So if you have any variables in your program, presumably you're going to want to write to them to change them, hence variables. And so you're going to have to use an org statement somewhere to put your RAM to put your variables out into RAM. And it's using an org statement, of course, that assumes you're using assembly language. If you're using a compiled language like C, you may use some kind of directive that ends up telling the linker where to put your code or where to put your variables so that things are allocated correctly. If you're using one of the other language options we described, hopefully the problem's already kind of solved once you get things to load in the right way. But again, you'll need to really understand what you're doing if you want to use a different language, different style of language. Again, your variables will need to be in RAM. Typically, if you're going to run code directly from where it sits in ROM, which is usually a pretty good idea, then of course you'll have to use an org statement to put that out of the physical address of the ROM. I say it's a good idea because you're not wasting RAM memory that could be used for something else like graphical displays or for variable, data collection or whatever else. Depending on what you're doing, there might be good reasons to relocate your code from the ROM out into RAM. Again, part of it might be because you're using some weird language system that kind of depends on that. The other might be that you may be using software breakpoints in your code, either for debugging or possibly for who knows what. But if you want to be able to insert breakpoints or change bits of your code kind of on the fly, if you want to do self-modifying code, so there's a code word for Simon just woke up. He heard me say self-modifying code. Anyway, if you're going to run self-modifying code, if you're going to boot it out of a cartridge, you're going to somehow need to relocate that code out to RAM for it to be able to self-modify. Okay, what about stack? Normally, most programs, just because you're executing out of ROM on a cartridge, you typically do not have to reallocate the stack. Stack's already been allocated and kind of in a safe way. When you start executing, your stack is there, and you typically don't have to move it. Now, depending on how much reorganization of memory and how much you're taking over the machine, you may want to move it. There's nothing really to stop you from doing that, and it's probably a good idea to think about where your stack is going to go and take control of it yourself. Just from a software development standpoint. But typically you do not need to relocate your stack. It'll already be allocated in RAM and ready for you to use. Okay, so now that we've cleared out how you might go about developing for a cartridge and why you'd want to, I guess we haven't talked about all the how, but we've talked about some of the introduction to the how, basic choices about what languages to use and where you're going to allocate some stuff. But what about the actual development of the code? Writing instructions, executing, and watching things fail, and then try to figure out what's broken and how to debug it. So one thing that is very useful and very helpful is, in most cases, you can develop your program completely as a RAM-based program, completely as something that loads off of a disk and executes and never even thinks about coming out of ROM. Now, at some point, that will bite you when you finally try to move it over, if you haven't thought about the issues of being in ROM, there might be program problems that will sneak up on you when you actually do relocate to a cartridge. But usually those problems are easier to solve kind of once you know you have working code than it is to simultaneously try to solve new unknown problems when you're working with new unknown code. So it's kind of a pick your poison sort of problem. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you're going to be using a debugger, a software debugger, something that inserts software interrupts for breakpoints and that sort of thing, you may have to run your code from RAM just so that your monitor program or debugger program can actually insert those SWI instructions. It's basically a lot like self-modifying code. If you're going to modify it, if you're going to change that location, it needs to be in RAM. Now you may or may not use a debugger. Many people don't, but if you do, that's something to think about. Another option is to use an emulator, and there are a couple of emulators available to us that have built-in debuggers. And now in these cases, I'm not sure if I haven't actually tried either of these, so I'm not entirely sure if they allow you to debug from what should be a ROM location, or if they handle that, or if you still might need to do something differently to make sure that you're in RAM when you use the debuggers, depending on what you're doing. So I'll leave that as an exercise for research to a research exercise to the listener. But I will give you a couple of links in the show notes. Here's one to dorkbotpdx.org's blog, Skinny, and it's use_memes_debugger_2_reverse_engineer_and_extend_old_games. Let me say that again. Used memes debugger to reverse engineer and extend old games. So that sounds like kind of a cool thing to do. In that case, I think they're working on Robotron 2084, the arcade game. Happens to use a 6809. So there might be some useful stuff in there for you. I'm sure much of it applies to if you were debugging a CoCo under MAME. It turns out under XROAR you can also do some cool debugging. XROAR actually can be a GDB target for remote debugging. Of course, I think that depends on you having a 6809 based GDB built from somewhere. I'm not sure if the docs are out there in the XROAR section or if it's something you need to ping Kieran about, but those are pretty good options to think about when you're developing code, especially if you've mostly developed your code in RAM so that it just sort of works if you load it from disk and you've got the disk version working, and you want to move it to ROM. You might try just doing so with the emulator. In fact, if you may want to use the debuggers when you're working on it in the first place. So using the debugger with an emulator generally a good idea anyway. So go ahead and give it a try. One more option is you could actually use what's called a ROM emulator. And what this is a piece of hardware that you usually are able to load code into kind of through an outside channel, like, over a USB wire or something like that. And then it plugs in where a ROM chip would have gone. And so in this case, you'd have like a ROM cartridge, but it would be plugged into the ROM emulator. And so you can update the code on this emulated ROM and then plug it into the CoCo like it's real hardware. And, so if you think you've pretty much got things like they ought to be, but for some reason it's not quite working, you could use a ROM emulator. And then, as you work through the problem, you can just upload the code. You don't have to pull ROMs. You don't have to erase EPROMs and reburn them, and that sort of things. So I'll put another link in the show note. This is to emotes.net and their product called the Ostrich 2.0. I've got one. I've used it just a bit. I know Boise Pete has one, and he's used it for a number of things. He seemed to say good things about it. So you may want to check out the Ostrich 2.0. Okay, so finally, once you've kind of got things in place, how can you be sure? How do you know you're ready? Once you've built your cartridge images, you want to load them up on an emulator. The emulators can be a little funny about how to load ROM-based code, but they all have ways to do it. So it's usually a command line options, or the user interface probably has some place where you can go and say what's plugged in and what's not. Some of them expect only specific ROMs for specific cartridges or whatever. I don't know if that's true for Extra or MAME or not, but I have seen some that they only support the ROM packs that they know, that sort of thing. If you have a situation like that, you might have to rebuild the emulator or something to accommodate you. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. But anyway, test it out on the emulator. Once you get it working on the emulator, especially for basic stuff, usually stuff that's going to break, if you have working code for a disk-based game and you want to move it to ROM, usually the stuff that's going to break, it's going to break first thing. It's just not going to load at all. Or maybe, it'll load for the intro screen, but it won't load for the main game, and you should know your program well enough to kind of know the kinds of changes that are going on in different segments of the game, and so you should be able to figure out, hey, I should test this and test that, and at that point it starts executing out of a different section of memory, so should test that. If you're the developer, you should have a good idea what to test, but once you have the image running on the emulator, burn it to ROM and EEPROM and put it on a physical cartridge and plug it in, give it a try. That should be it. So once you've gotten that far, you're pretty much ready to publish. So either get yourself a collection of cartridge ROMs, however big you want to do your run, and get your cartridge packs and whatever else you're going to do with it, or contact me or some of us other Kabbalists or whatever that have access to cartridge packs and know how to get the stickers made and boxes built and all that sort of stuff, and tell us about your game and give us an idea of what sort of royalty you'd be looking for or whatever, how much you think the game should sell for, what kind of extra hardware your game might need, that sort of thing. Anyway, come and talk to us. Tell us, what you think, and we'll see if we can work something out. Well, anyway, I think that about covers it. Developing for a ROM is really, it's not that much harder than writing the game to begin with. It's a good exercise, and I think it's fun. I think it's a cool way to play games on old computers. It's nice to just be able to plug the cartridge in and have it boot right up, and you don't need to carry around a disk drive or a CoCo SDC even as just one more piece to carry around. All you need is the cartridge and your CoCo and video display, and then depending on the game, you need a joystick or something, and that's pretty much it. Makes a great demo. You don't have to sit around figuring out how to load stuff through the cassette port off the audio on your phone or anything like that. That was actually one of the big motivations for why I wanted to get cartridges going, is I was involved with the local makerspace, and we kept going out and doing demos, and I'd have to drag CoCos out or whatever. I didn't want to drag disk drives out, so I'd have my software as a WAV file on my cell phone, and I'd plug it into the cassette interface, and I think I had a kind of a bad cable, so a lot of times it wouldn't load. And one particular time we were just trying to do a demo, and it took me like 40 minutes to load Farfall. And it wasn't long after that Farfall was on a cartridge. So hopefully you don't have to have quite that kind of experience to be motivated to get a cartridge out. But whether it's that or something else, like I said, when you're ready, come talk to us, and we'll figure it out. Until then, be good, CoCo forever. Remember, you're only young once, but you can be retro forever. So, thanks for listening. Bye.
Speed Racer from Mistron. Speed Racer is a supercar race game that puts you behind the wheel with incredible scrolling 3D graphics. It's simply the finest car race game ever written for the CoCo. Just $34.95 disc or tape, 32K required. From Mistron.
Oh yeah, well, I don't care what you say. The CoCo is the best 8-bit platform ever. Oh, is this thing recording? Holy smokes. Alright, welcome back to the Games Corner on episode 24, our CoCo New Year. On this segment, I won't be reviewing a game once again. I'm going to talk about CoCo user groups and clubs from back in the day. But before I get into that, it got me thinking about one thing. I was thinking about renaming the title of this Games Corner to Neil's Hideout or Neil's Corner. What do you all think of that? This is my space at the end of the podcast, just like being in the back of a magazine, like I mentioned before in last month's segment. I figured it makes sense because I'm not always reviewing a game. I could be reviewing a utility or something completely else. I wonder what John will think of this change. Alright, on to the topic. CoCo user groups and CoCo clubs. Well, back in the day, I was fortunate enough to experience belonging to a few of them. When I got my first computer, the Tandy Color Computer 3, yeah, I know, I was a little late into the game. I purchased it from our local Radio Shack, all because it was a super sale we noticed in a flyer. I really had no idea what platform to buy. It was seriously based on this fantastic price listed in the flyer that had been mailed to us that Saturday morning. Completely purchased on a whim. My father and I go down to Radio Shack and purchase the CoCo 3, and I was lucky enough to talk him into buying an FD502 disk drive and a box of 10 blank floppy disks to go with it. The CM8 monitor was definitely out of the question, so I used a color TV until I was able to save up enough money to buy a CM8 monitor. When returning home, I was so excited to unbox the computer and get everything set up. The hookup went well, and before you knew it, I was greeted with the OK prompt we all know and love so much. But then I was like, now what? Up until this point, I didn't have much experience with computers at all. So what did I do next? I dug right into the manuals that came with the CoCo 3 and disk drive. The Introducing Your Color Computer 3, Extended Color Basic, and Disk Extended Basic manuals, which, by the way, they are all excellent manuals to learn from. I was lucky to pick the right platform. Soon enough, I was learning RS-DOS commands, formatting blank floppies, and writing in some simple basic programs to save on those floppies. But after roughly a month went by, I yearned for more. I had learned from borrowing some of my friends' programs that you cannot use Apple II or Commodore 64 floppies in the CoCo because they are not compatible. I was on this quest to learn and do more with my CoCo. So what did I do next? Back to Radio Shack I went. With some hard-earned paper route money I had saved up. I remember buying Shanghai, RoboCop, and Rogue for the first time. I wanted to get a disc-based game to utilize my floppy drive more. On a side note, I was really happy to pick that game because I got to use the DOS command to load it, and I remember being amazed at seeing in the center of the screen, OS 9 boot. When I was at the counter paying for my new software, I happened to notice a flyer advertisement printed out on the counter mentioning Burlington Color Computer User Group, with the contact, date, and time information. I asked the employee at Radio Shack about it, and he said, oh yeah, if you're into the color computer, go check it out. They are a great bunch of guys that meet up every month. Well, you better believe it. I went to check it out. I talked my dad into driving me clear across the city to attend this meeting that was held in a high school cafeteria. When we had arrived, we were greeted by some of the members and got registered with the group. There was a small fee to join, and this allowed you access to the club's software library and newsletters. I was so excited to be there and listen to the talks they had about different CoCo hardware and software, tips and tricks, projects, and so on. I was completely mesmerized and trying to soak in all the information I could. My poor dad was not into computers and just quietly sat there during the meetings. Later on, he used to just drop me off and pick me back up after the meeting. I would never miss a month. I looked forward to these meetings and would count down the days until the next one. I met so many great people, learned a ton of information, found out about Rainbow magazines, got to borrow so many amazing software titles from their library that at that time I didn't even know existed, such as Rupert's Rhythm, Wild West, Junior's Revenge, Kayum Guy. Those are just to name a few. Up until this point, I was only familiar with software titles sold at Radio Shack. I soon started to discover from the club software library and reading through borrowed Rainbow magazines, there was a huge amount of software and hardware available for this computer. I remember at a few of the meetings the big talk was on the TC9 and MM1 computers. They were a new thing coming out at the time, and the next platform to get into moving forward from the CoCo 3. I bought a lot of used hardware from the members such as printers and modems. I was excited to call into the public library at 300 baud on my CoCo to check if a book was available before actually driving to the library. I remember my parents were amazed this was even possible. Unfortunately, after roughly a year of attending this users group, they announced it was closing. I was bummed because I really enjoyed attending. But there was some good news. One of the members tipped me off about another CoCo user group that was still very active and strong. It was in a city called Milton, which is about a half-hour drive from us. I just now had to convince my dad into driving me each month. Well, I was a lucky kid. It didn't take much convincing for him to take me. This users group was called Rough Club. The word rough, I believe, stood for Rubicon's Once Users Group Hobbyist. I'm totally going by memory on that. This club was a totally different atmosphere. It was held at the president's house in his basement. All of us would meet every month and give talks, tell tips and tricks we have learned, and hack around with hardware. I was learning so much at such a fast pace. Another cool thing with this club is they produce their own newsletter and software programs on a floppy disk each month, very similar to Rainbow on Disk. I think back to this part of my life and remember these users groups. It was such a magical time. Back then there was no public internet and Facebook. This was our way of communicating and sharing information each month. I believe this is why I really enjoy CoCo Fest and other retro computing events such as the VCF shows. It reminds me of smaller user groups where we can get together in real life. It's the whole social aspect and not being behind a screen all the time. Now fast forward almost 3 decades, and who would have guessed, because I did push myself to go to CoCo Fest, I met some amazing people there who I am now friends with, and we are putting on our own fest, Tandy Assembly. I am honored to help fund and be a part of this event. With that said, I hope to see all of you there. Oh wait, before I go, just a few quick things. If any of you attended any CoCo users groups or clubs and would like to share your thoughts, please drop us an email. We'd definitely like to hear. Also, if any of you listening to this attended the Rough Club I just mentioned that was held in Milton, Ontario, Canada, please drop me an email. I'd be curious to see what you thought of it. Well, until next month, CoCo forever.
Here's a color computer monitor bargain from your nearby Radio Shack. Save $50 on our exclusive Tandy CM8 RGB analog color monitor. Only $249.95 during this sale. It's designed specifically for the Color Computer 3. It's a perfect complement to the superb graphics capabilities of the Color Computer 3 and produces sharp, crisp text and dazzling graphs and illustrations. The sale price Tandy CM8 color monitor. Only at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Beep, beep, incoming transmissions. This just came in. If you are a CoCo celebrity from the past or present and would like to give a talk at our Tandy Assembly event, please get in touch with John at CoCoCrew.org. That's JOHN at CoCocrew.org. We would definitely love to have you as a speaker at Tandy Assembly. Well, you guessed it. We have reached the end of episode 24. I'd like to thank our host John Linville for finding all these interesting news articles and providing us with amazing tech segments each month. I also would like to thank Mike Rowan for cranking out all these commercials and audio clips you hear on this show. He really does have a cool setup for making these. I got to see his mini setup he uses on the road, and it even includes a small portable synth keyboard. I want to send a thank you to Carlos Camacho for buying me lunch at CoCo Fest. I won't forget that. Food always tastes better when it's free. Last but not least, we'd like to thank all of you for listening and your support. Until next month, CoCo and Retro Forever.